So, you want to do VFX? They asked you. Hello, person. My name is Teague Chrystie. I'm a visual effects artist, and I'm sitting here with Ryan Wieber.
Hello, my name is indeed Ryan Wieber.
Hi.
I'm sitting here with Teague Chrystie.
This is weird. We're on couches. We have microphones. There's the idea of ideas laid out in front of us, and we want to talk to the budding visual effects artists and even people who've already gotten into the professional side of things and people who have thought about it and have actually no idea what it means to have a career in VFX. What are some of the things that ends up happening when you do that?
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of the sort of the backstory to the whole premise of doing this is that each of us, as folks who have been in the VFX world for some years now.
Over a decade now, professionally.
Yeah, indeed.
Man, time flies so fast.
And so we get a lot of emails and stuff, and often from younger folks just sort of curious or interested or in the process of breaking into this world who just have a lot of general feeling it out type questions and stuff.
What kind of software should I use? It's like, oh yeah, sure, okay. But then also you get questions from people who are like farther along, like, what should I be charging? What should I put on my demo reel? I don't know what the actual specifics of this industry are at all. Are they written down somewhere? And the answer is like, not really, no.
The awkward questions to ask, which often don't have obvious or correct answers 100% of the time. So we've tinkered with the idea of trying to sort of give a unified answer that would be sort of, you get one of these sort of FAQ type questions, and then here, check this out. This is a resource that's a much better answer than I can give you right now.
Right.
And to have that to reach to and to throw out to people. And so
it'd be nice to have one. The other way we were thinking about it in terms of like, how should we frame this? It was like, well, every now and then, like my mom, for instance, my mom won't email Ryan. My mom will email me, at least as far as I know.
Mm-hmm.
And she'll be like, oh, my friend at work's kid is interested in doing VFX and she has a few questions about what she should do and she doesn't know where to start. Can you get her off on the right? And it's like, oh God, Mom, really? Okay, well now the email that I want to write in reply to that, like I have so much to say, the email will be a novel, and then I'm always like, so I guess I'm writing a novel today. I've added that onto my. It'd be nice if that all that information that we want to put out there in terms of, okay, here are the things from sort of Jump Street up to, we'll say 60 miles per hour. All in one place. So this is sort of the audio version of that super long email that we kind of want to write
from our unique, weird little corner of the world here.
Yeah, we're not actually like the authority on this,
right?
At all.
Don't go into this expecting that.
Right? No.
Yeah.
We are only speaking to you right now because we have microphones and have done visual effects, and that's literally it. We do not think that we are the experts on the subject. We don't think these are the only ways you can do it. These are just the opinions of two random people who have terrible haircuts and are rarely wearing pants, if ever even going outside of the house. There is no prestige to be had. But if you were curious, we do have answers for various topics along the way.
And that being said, we are along different interesting little paths in this exploration here.
Ryan, why don't you tell the people, in case they don't know you or your work, what kind of a career you've had so far?
Sure. Well, if you've heard of me, I suspect it's by way of the Ryan versus Dorkman or Ryan versus Brandon fan film.
I thought it was going to be your dogfighting ring.
There's that too.
Things never die in the Google age, man.
So I got really interested in visual effects just naturally in watching movies as a kid and everything, and then got a computer capable of doing digital effects. And then got super into it, just on my own, just shooting crap in my backyard with my little, mini DV camera that I got, and doing all sorts of little tests that I would put online. And this was, before YouTube and all that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't quite the same as it is now. And that, like, having a little website with a gallery of things like that was sort of unique and interesting and noteworthy enough to actually get me noticed by an awesome dude by the name of Clint Young, who happened to be working at LucasArts at the time.
LucasArts?
LucasArts, the video games company. Yes. He was the lead artist over there.
Yeah, it. Every time I hear Ryan's story, it always goes immediately from like making stuff in his backyard to the guy from LucasArts contacted me.
You're right.
And it's always like, what? That's amazing.
And we'll throw out there right now that my story is sort of funny because it's all out of order. Teague analogized it to a Tarantino film of someone learning to do visual effects.
Like he took one of the great cool scenes from the middle of the story that should be in the middle of the story and put it at the beginning, so it's like, whoa, hello, way to start. Except it's his real life.
So, Yeah, so Ryan versus Dorkman had been made and is out at that time, and so
This is like 3 or 4 years before YouTube would even be a thing at all.
Oh, yes.
Not big, like literally be a thing at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 19 years old, and I'm getting texted by. I was messaging him, and he's like, "Hey, that's really cool work that you've been doing." Look in reference to my little gallery of stupid backyard effects clips on my site, Ryan versus Dorkman, of course, and invited me out to interview at the place, which I did, and they liked me enough that they offered me a gig over there. So I worked on Knights of the Old Republic 2 and the cutscenes and things like that, actually doing VFX compositing stuff. The episode 3 game, which eventually got taken over and BioWare did everything, and Republic Commando, and I did some in-game effects for that, which was really cool. And so that was like my first sort of legitimate quote-unquote industry work that I was doing, and that was for about 1 year. And there's many stories that we could go into later, maybe.
What's funny about that is I met you on the place where Ryan versus Dorkman happened, which was a little Star Wars fan website for basically like Star Wars fan filmmakers, people who wanted to make lightsaber fight videos.
A forum.
Yeah, it was a message board of people, but it was a Star Wars centric place. It wasn't that we were only ever doing Star Wars stuff, but obviously Ryan versus Dorkman is pretty Star Warsy, what with its lightsaber fight and all. And then you work on KOTOR 2, which is a fairly Star Warsy thing itself. And it's amazing how you went like from liking Star Wars to sort of working in the Star Wars orbit, and then that story comes to an end later too.
It comes full circle a decade later.
Right.
Yeah.
Which
we'll
talk about the career being in a weird order. But all right, cool. So you're working at LucasArts for a while. Pretty cool.
Yeah. Pretty cool. And then they downsized everything.
You moved. You just like moved into like a staff position there, and you worked there for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so plugged in there, did that for a year, and then they downsized the whole thing and basically sort of laid off half of everybody, and that was fine. That was cool. It was not like a personal thing, or it was just sort of getting ready to move to the Presidio and have that whole new phase kick in. And so after that, I was like, great, this is cool. This is like, I feel like I am worth a ton now, like not money-wise, but like I'm confident now. Like I've actually been working on real stuff. This is cool. My job before that was Blockbuster Video. I was stocking shelves on the last store that had VHS tapes.
Speaking of Tarantino.
Yeah. And so yeah, after that, then I went and I started looking for something a little more oriented toward, television and movies, which is what I was really always interested in doing visual effects wise. And I'm not sure at what point we want to jump to you, but
let's run through your whole thing.
Okay.
Kind of do like the short overrun of the whole thing.
Sure. So
bear in mind later, many parts of this, like this is just the intro. What's going to end up happening later is we're going to talk about what these things all mean and the right things and wrong things and insights about how the business works. We're just kind of giving you a bio right now.
Little overview here. Little context for us.
Yep.
So so the place that bit was Stargate Digital, as it was at the time. It's now more known as Stargate Studios.
Is that like Stargate the movie?
They got to the name first, actually. The company, Sam Nicholson, the owner of that place. The story is that he got to Stargate well before there was ever a Stargate movie, and so the confusion that arises every time you mention Stargate to somebody, and they're like, "Oh, that TV show," and you're like, "Actually, no, not that. That's one of the few things they don't work on. Everything else, always 20 shows at once.
Not that one. If you really wanted to mess with them, what you should do is like, is that the one where like the spice must flow and all that? First of all, no, that's Dune. Second of all, no, it's not that. Like just keep putting layers of misunderstandings on top of it.
Then they're so bewildered you can hit them with anything after that. Yeah. Right. Anyway, so yeah, the sort of snapshot of that is that I kind of went in there just starting off as a junior artist, just picking up your typical rotoscoping stuff, and we'll get into what that exactly means before long here. And just sort of worked my way up. And so after I was there for several months, they liked me enough to offer me a staff position. And once again, this is the order of everything being totally backwards because,
it's odd. Yeah.
As this sort of first little tidbit of context and information for working in the visual effects industry, the norm is really to be bouncing around freelance a lot and work a few weeks here, a few months there, to just kind of move to where the gig is and the work is, as we go. And that's much more sort of Teague's story. And so me plugging in directly to this place and then going staff and being there for 7.5 years was the length, and sort of working my way up from that junior artist to certainly one of the senior artists by the time I was walking out of there, and having supervised some stuff and led some teams and
won any
done
awards?
hundreds of shots. 2 Emmys later, yes, and a third nomination and a VES nomination. So so it was a really great place for that.
If you're in the video effects industry long enough, there's a good chance you might work on something that wins an Emmy or even an Oscar. Generally speaking, you will not expect to get an actual statue. That's not a thing that ever
it happens all the time that you contribute to a project like that, but they can only have 8 or so people actually on the roster up for an Emmy.
Like at the Oscars, if they said your name at the telecast, you probably get a statue. They made one with your name on it, but the 5 million people that worked on that movie, you don't get a statue.
Right.
You get to say you worked on that movie, but you don't get a statue. Except you actually literally have 2 Emmys with your name on it.
I have 2 statuettes.
2 of the actual statues. They're big and they're heavy and they're very nice.
Yeah, you could definitely kill somebody with them. And the pointy, the wings, the little lightning bolt wings.
Yeah, you could put an eye out with those things. You're a dogfighting ring. Dogfighting ring.
But
this isn't true, but I'm going to make it sound true by the end of this.
This really just going to keep bringing it up. It's like, is he onto something with that or what? Anyway,
how long were you at Stargate? You were at Stargate for like 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, 7.5 years. And so eventually, I kind of reached the point where it was going great. I had worked on tons of stuff and everything, but I was just feeling a little like I was just getting a little wanderlust.
It is almost like you got married in high school.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. And because one of the next places I went to was called Crazy Horse Effects, and the and it was Paul and Zena Graff were the married couple who sort of own and run the company, and that was the analogy there, is because I worked with them for several months, and then there was no end date specifically expressed, and so we had the conversations over dinner. It was kind of like, so what's going on? Are we settling down here, or are you going to go and continue sleeping around? And I said, well, and I had to have that sort of awkward, okay, well, I am out here to freelance. I should keep moving and rambling on. And they said, okay, great. And so it was a very funny, awkward sort of thing. But okay, we should go to you and we can get back to me. I've been talking
sort
for a
of
while
match the parallel here. Well, I started doing. Ryan is like 2 or 3 years ahead of me, but generally the same beginning story where it's working at home, doing After Effects-y stuff. I started in like 2001 or early 2002, and it was mostly just doing the same sort of stuff he was talking about. Mostly I got into it because I was always interested in like Photoshop type stuff, and I knew a bit about Photoshop and like image editing by way of Photoshop, and I wanted to do that on video. And I was like, what's the answer to that question? It's like, After Effects lets you do that sort of thing. And this is like After Effects 5, maybe it was before 5. I feel like it was called something else before 5.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But it was, the very beginning of the thing. In fact, it was lightsabers that got me into it, because I was making, I was into Star Wars stuff. I was into Star Wars stuff and doing image editing, which begat Photoshop lightsabers, which begat After Effects lightsabers, which begat this whole story. And after 5, it would have been like 6 or 7 years of just fiddling around at home, mostly working just in After Effects and Photoshop on things like that, or little short films that I was making. I ended up finishing high school. Yeah, I started young. And I moved to Florida to attend a 1-year program down there called DAVE, the DAVE School, Digital Animation and Visual Effects, which is a 12-month course where you're working every day of the week for the whole 12 months, 5 hours a day. And you can soak in it if you want to. And what they teach there, or at least what they taught at the time, this is now 10 years ago. I started in 2006 at the DAVE School. That's 10 years ago. Also to date this audio file. And it might have changed since then. But my experience at the time was about, I don't want to put a number out there because it might be different now or wrong or something else, but it's a nice car worth of money to go to that school. But it was super informative, and like the 5 hour a day model is a slightly different experience than the sort of picture of college that I got from the pop culture, because I never went to real college. This was my only college experience. And from college that I've heard my friends talk about or seen in movies, it's more like it's sort of taking 3 or 4 or 5 things at a time. It's like 2 hours a week, and it's sort of, this was like every day, wake up at 7, go 5 hours today. And we're just like, you took 5 hours of tutorials yesterday. Now it's 5 hours tutorials today. And over the course of that year, man, you get up to speed real fast. And the first thing we were learning over the course of that, the priority at that school was actually 3D, not 2D. I had a little bit of experience with After Effects. Like I wasn't a great After Effects user, but I'd also been really familiar with it. So the things that I was doing wrong very well, but I was doing them all wrong, sort of, self-taught problem. but I had never done anything with 3D, and that was part of what I wanted to learn at the Dave School, so I could have sort of more stuff in the pocket. 12 months at the Dave School, and after that was done, I had learned enough of Lightwave 3D and also Digital Fusion, which was a node-based compositor, which is... I'm glad that I learned Fusion because it set me up, like I was sort of quote-unquote forced to learn Fusion just because that's what the program is teaching.
Right.
And without being pushed through it, I never probably would have picked up a second compositing software. And later in your life, you'll find out that the ability to just sort of add new software to your life is a skill worth getting. Not even necessarily what the new software is, just
Right.
being open to learning new software.
Yeah.
I'm glad I've had the experience of learning several because even though I'm still dragging my feet on Nuke, sorry, Nuke people.
And at the time, that would have had you all set up to do a Shake, I guess.
Yeah, it was aiming towards Shake, and then Shake disappeared.
Right.
Or Smoke. No,
Shake, and then it was discontinued.
Right. Shake.
Yeah.
What was Smoke? Whatever. There's so many. And they're all.
There is a Smoke.
And they're all combustion terms.
Of course.
Flame and fusion and Inferno. But we finished Dave School, and about 12 months later, and I'll go back into this later, I suppose, but we'll end up talking about the idea of effects schools and whether those are even a thing you should do, and opinions will super vary. But I spent some money on mine, and it was great. And I left that school with a demo reel and several interviews out in Hollywood, California, which I had never been to before. And I flew out. Now I'm 19 years old. Flew out for like a week of interviews with places, and the school helped with placement. A lot of the teachers there are old artists or old like supervisors who had come to Florida. They wanted to teach kids for a while, and they still have all their contacts in LA. So they do a great job of trying to reach out and find you people.
That's good.
And I came out because there was, the school starts, there's maybe 30 or 40 people in your class. By the end of the year, almost all of them have dropped out because they realize that it's not as, I think they were expecting it to be like camp or something. But by the end of it, it's like, this is people working hard to learn how to do a thing. And at the end of the year, you actually make a short film on a kind of a crammed schedule. So it's like, this is the gauntlet. Let's do it.
Project.
Right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And the people who survive that process, I guess, are sort of placed with some interviews. I had 5 or 6. I came out. I got one of them. And about a month later, I moved out to start my internship at a little boutique effects shop. They later hired me. That was Flash Filmworks. I was working on The Pacific, which itself, the episode I worked on won an Emmy, but I didn't get one.
Did you get a little certificate thing that said that you worked on it, that you contributed to it? Because you will get that sometimes.
I didn't get one of those. I'm sure the company did. In fact, I think the company might have gotten a statue. But
Dude, too many people, like everybody in the world was working on the Pacific when that was going around.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's a recurring thing, is that just like it's a small world, and we just recently happened to be from completely different directions, like maybe going to work on the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's surprising how small of a world it really, or an industry, I should say, it really is, and that like when there's a big project rolling through, a lot of different places get their fingerprints on it,
right?
And
then like 4 people all worked on the same movie, and none of them worked at the same studio on it,
right?
But worked there for just a couple of months and got laid off, and that was my first experience of a real job out in Hollywood. And of course, now I have made like I was an artist for just a second. I was getting paid very little, and then they were done with work for me to do. So all of a sudden, it's like, cool. Well, I'm living in Hollywood. I have a little bit of money I just made. Nothing that I've just worked on can I actually put on a reel because it hasn't come out yet.
Of course.
So it's as if I didn't get that job at all in terms of like, well, here's what I can show you that I know how to do. And it was a little bit of like a tightrope walk there for a second, but at no point did I ever get so far from making the ends meet that I had to stop what I was doing and call it quits. And for the first year or so, it was get a job. Oh, cool. A few months, get a job. And as you sort of, if you can keep finding the lily pads,
right,
you get to the point where eventually it's thick enough that you can sort of just walk a path across the river. And that's where it came to, like literally a year or 2 after school, I was generally able to get work at all times. And the more that happens, like is what the tipping point there is, and we'll go into it more later, is that you've worked for enough, like I've worked for her and I've worked for him and I've worked for him, and they all, even though they don't know each other, generally need someone every now and then. And if you do a good job and they like you, like you'll finish working for her and then you'll like ask Cat Guy, hey, do you have anything? And he's like, nope. And the second guy is like, yeah, I do. And you can kind of just keep with just a few of the same people sort of monkey barring your way until eventually a 4th person gets added. And like if that process snowballs the way it's meant to, that's what they mean by networking. I found out later. It was later explained to me. That's what it's supposed to be.
Exactly.
No one explained it to me in those terms. You get to like, now I've got 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 people that I work for kind of back and forth. And it gets to the point where in my last couple of years, and insert, I'm now putting brackets, editor's note, insert 40 gigs. Now, years later, of that same process, just here for years and years.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't even made a reel or a resume in a while because I just keep kind of getting, hey, are you available?
I was going to talk about that too.
That's the dream.
The later that I go, and that may just be more about where you're navigating your way to in the industry. It's like it's much more about, hey, you know anybody?
Right.
Like I can't tell you how many times I've been like, hey, you got a guy who you recommend we need some compers on this, and we need a 3D guy for that, or whatever.
Look, Sandra had to leave. We have an empty chair. Do you know anyone who can step in on like that kind of thing?
Where it really is just you just going, yeah, this guy, and that's it.
Right.
Like there's really not much of a process after that in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and then you get a phone call, and then you don't erupt into a weird volcano of immediate racism on the phone, and they bring you in for an interview.
It's
and
a
then
struggle every time.
And then again, you don't suddenly become a weird asshole, and they go, you're exactly the kind of person we're looking for. And you go, boom, I got the job.
Nailed it.
Right, and then they fire you for unrelated reasons.
Yeah.
You generally, that you weren't doing anything wrong, they just ran out of work for you to do. But yeah, my and of course, over the course of my insert editor's note 40 random gigs here, I discovered something about the industry that Ryan later got to while he was being all Mr. Staff Artist, Mick LucasArts, was that there's a lot of little tributaries and sort of branches off of just the side of the main thoroughfare of VFX and working at this company on that show and then moving to this company to work on that movie and this show and that, which is that also you happen to have learned a lot of skills that are crucial for unrelated, sort of related industries like trailer titles or motion graphics or like
in the case of our buddy Seth doing this wacky what do you call it, like what am I thinking, like amusement park,
like a ride film
type
sort of
stuff.
thing where it's like, hey, we need it was the King Kong ride at Universal Studios where it's like part of this is like a projected background that you kind of float by, and the thing that's back there doesn't exist, so we have to make it. And guess what? That means visual effects, even though this isn't a movie theater. We just need someone to make those images,
which has very different and specific needs, but all the same technical savvy.
Yeah, once you've learned the things you need for VFX, you've actually kind of learned like 80% of a lot of other jobs too, which is cool. In the case of like something like the ride films, or in my case, like trailer titles or other stuff, if you do a good job on that thing, all of a sudden, one of your like 5, I always go work for them, supervisor people, 5 of them, like one of the 5 is a person off in ride films. And every now and then you'll go back over there and you start building up like a second career off to one side that you might not do anything with for years on end, but you keep coming back to it because you have done that work before. That means you are more qualified than almost everyone because almost no one's done this work before. So even if it's like, I only did it once, man, and it was weird, I didn't know what I was doing. It's like, guess what? That puts you in the like 1 percentile for that. So do you want the job? It's like, sure, I haven't been there in a while. Let's go back to that world for a second and see if the colors are still the same. But yeah, that sort of a process with the occasional weird tributary, mostly just random effects gig for my last 10 years, is how you summarize my whole like back half of my bio. Ryan's continues to have interesting, weird little strides. I think when we last left off, you were at Crazy Horse wrapping up.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say this sort of the contrast against yours is that the way that mine went is when I made the decision to go freelance and start to bounce around, and I want to go experience other places and work on all kinds of different projects. I'd like to navigate my way toward doing feature films. I'd like to start doing some jobs where I'm using Nuke, which is something we'll talk about a little later. And the way that was recommended to me to enter into approaching this was to get on board with a thing called the DAA, which stands for the Digital Artist Agency. And just like an actor has an agent who sort of keeps their ear to the ground and looks for work and tries to line people up and is friend to both studio looking for artists and artists looking for studios, such a thing exists for visual effects specifically, which is not very common.
I had not heard of this when you got on board with that, and I was like, that's enviable. That is so much nicer.
It
that makes
me
so
like
much
a good
sense.
thing to do. Now, of course, they take their percentage and all that stuff, but the appeal of it to me was I had just worked 7.5 years at one place. I was not doing any of that networking that you were just talking about. I wasn't making those. I wasn't cultivating relationships and knowing guys from. I really just knew the same set of folks who were there passing through, Stargate. And so the DAA sounded really cool, and it's really just the fact that they had all the connections were there. And so my guy, his name is Bob Coleman, and Dan are the guys over there. And so they just and he's got relationships going back years and years into all corners of the industry and knows about all sorts of things. And so not only was it great to be able to just go, this is an organization and a team of folks who are very nice and personable and can find all this freelance work and provide options to me, but also in sort of a career advisor sort of way. Like Bob is very, very much about, here's how we should diversify your skill set to give you more options in the future that will pay better or be more fulfilling for the types of projects that you want to do, and just sort of having a partner in crime to really start to try to navigate these waters. You got a team. Yeah, exactly.
That's neat.
And so that was really a good thing for me, but that is absolutely not I think they only represent maybe 60 or 80 people. So it's not a big thing, and I really haven't heard of other places doing it, and so my path is a little unique and unusual in that way, but it does bring me around to the part where I'm doing freelance work and bouncing from place to place, not unlike yourself.
Welcome to the fun.
Yeah, and it is fun. I mean, it's nice. I've worked at maybe a dozen other places here and there, and just sort of seeing how different places operate, and getting to work on all the. I mean, Stargate offered a tremendous variety of types of projects to work on, but mostly television.
Yeah, sure.
And so getting able to sort of break that open and go into all sorts of various other little interesting projects was great too. So
yeah, man. And then of course, like to sort of put a bead on the end of your summarized bio, do you want to hit the high points of where that kind of led to most recently?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess
just to put a button on that.
Yeah.
The bio topic.
Right. And and to be fair, and we'll get into more of the nuance of it later in terms of the different types of things that I ended up doing in these recent years, which have been really interesting and important to the evolution of me and my career. But obviously the thing you're alluding to is one of my most recent projects I got to contribute to was Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens.
The full circle.
Coming around full circle. And so we can bury the lead on that and save that for the back end of the conversation, and we'll see how much of my NDA is going to get me in trouble. But no, it's going to be.
We're going to be fine.
Yeah. So one thing before we get too far from our origin stories, there is one specific thing to point out as a very frequently asked question is school. Is education for visual effects specifically, because one of the questions I get a lot is, from an ambitious kid who sort of has been playing around with After Effects or whatever at home, and they're kind of, getting some chops up. It's like, what do I do now? Well, I'm interested, right. I'm inclined, and have some ability there. What's next? And do we recommend going to school? And so, first off, what are the options that are out there?
Got a few options. I mean, more now than there was even when we were young. It's not like you have to paint on glass. This is not 1965 anymore. You can actually do this all on a computer. But even since we started, there's been for instance, there's a whole bunch more free tutorials, the world of like Video Copilot and places like that. There are a million things you can learn.
There's more
for free right
resources online than ever.
And those are all great, asterisk, and we'll talk about how those would involve themselves in a larger pipeline. But generally speaking, those are all great places to learn and to branch out and learn stuff that you don't already know. If you are in the mood to actually pay for something like that, there's a place called FX PhD online, which is wonderful. And it is not, you wouldn't call it cheap. It's not super expensive, but it's not cheap.
It's getting there though.
Lately?
Really? Too, yeah.
Wow.
They're offering a full course for a pretty affordable price. That's all access. And they include, licenses to certain softwares that you can use and stuff like that. That's really cool.
Yeah. FX PhD is wonderful. And that's a great way to get, first of all, like a lot of wonderful information in a single place, in a cogent one person teaching you all the premises, and it makes sense to you like a school would sort of way, but it's online. And the great part about this is that you can kind of learn what you need to learn, and they're all going to be taught to you in the form of good habits from a professional. Right. They're not, like, for instance, if you teach yourself all this stuff, which would be the comedy fourth option, which is how many people do learn how to do visual effects, is that you're like, my old joke was, like, I've been using Photoshop for 10 years, and I just found it as a fade tool. It's crazy. It's like, really? That's something that would have been taught to you walking in the room on day one if you've actually gone to a place that teaches you these things. And you can learn a lot by just messing with it yourself and sort of fiddling around and sort of dabbling here and there on Google. It does have a cost advantage, of course, but you might miss some spots. My sort of go-to recommendation is right down the middle. I say what you should do if you know that you're interested in this kind of FX PhD, just sign yourself up, hook up with like one or two courses that you think you'll be interested in, try them. Pay for it, go in, see what happens, try them. And if you like it, you are all set to like start loading up like Neo. And if you don't, you can kind of stay back in the world of freeness, and all you've lost is whatever it costs for like one thingy. But
you're still way cheaper than school.
You're still way cheaper than going to a school. And the other thing would be that you could go to an actual effects school. When I was starting out back in my day, there was only like a couple that you could find. One of them was Dave. One of them was Full Sail. And then there was a couple up like in Vancouver, and there's the place here, and there's Noman. But now I gather that there's just a bunch of effects schools everywhere, and they put out a lot of students. And they put out a lot of good work. In fact, I've seen even places in like France that I would normally not encounter at all because they're not in my normal sphere of where my jobs are. But my friends I have like people who are friends who live in France, and they work at visual effects schools. It's like, these kids are putting out stuff that is like, to say it's broadcast worthy is a slight against it. Like, it is great. It is excellent. There is no qualifier. It is just super good work.
Sure.
And how many people and for how long they were working on it?
They have a student VFX category in the VES, and you can see why, because you look at that stuff, it's shoulder to shoulder with anything.
Yeah, it's gotten to the point now where what the schools are putting out, if you get on board with them, and it's, first of all, I'm just talking about the quality of what I see from the school writ large, not necessarily individual students, but it is not fake learning. It is the real deal over there. The question becomes, are you spending money on something that you feel like you couldn't have gotten elsewhere for less money? Or like the order that you're learning it in and the organization of those concepts? I mean, that's a big part of why you ask for a teacher, but that might also be there in something like FX PhD. So you have to weigh your pros and cons there. But you do also maybe get something like a job placement, depending on how you do in the school program. Like, I was lucky enough, and it was not a formal thing at Dave. It was more like, all right, well, who clearly was trying the whole time?
Exactly.
And it's more of a, they are not going to sign up and say all the students are getting job placement, because a lot of the people who come into this industry, and I'm telling you this just to be honest with you, a lot of people who come into it go, whoa, never mind, about 6 months in. That happens kind of a lot. So they are gun shy about saying we're going to give everyone job placement, because who knows? You come into the school being all Mr. Serious or Miss Serious, and then the person who's next to you that day, you both start on the same day, is going to bail out 2 months from now because they were getting high every day and thought it was going to be like video game camp, but it wasn't.
Right.
So they are more like, we'll see who's serious. And generally speaking, I think schools and these programs do a fairly good job of helping out the people who were trying. But it also is not going to be a guarantee with any of these schools, even if they say all of our students are at Pixar now. Like, no. Maybe not.
And would you, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but would you say that another sort of feature of that is, even if you don't go right into something immediately, the connections that you've made there with other people will end up bearing fruit most of the time, just because you're probably knowing a few people who are succeeding and going forward and integrating, and they'll remember you and work that you did. And
there is, I had totally forgotten about that aspect of it. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, it's, you enter atmosphere, you break up, and there's a few of you that kind of like are streaking ballistically next to each other for a while. And you all come to LA at the same time, and now it's like, oh, one of the guys just left, and she just went back home, and it's like 5 of us and 4 of us. But having people out here that you went to school with and and they stay for a while is a huge part of it, because otherwise, like, unless you already live in Los Angeles, you don't know anyone here. So that's nice just to know people in this town, and it's a big town. And the other thing is, you have the teachers. So even if you do end up like, I got laid off, and you come back with your hat in your hands, like, what do I do now? There's at least someone to talk to about that, and you might have that. You certainly will have that if you have a bunch of online buddies or teachers that were teaching you, but it will be a different, a person to person, I've sat next to them for a year sort of relationship is something that sticks for a while, even after you're not sitting next to them every day. And that I did benefit from knowing a few people from both school as a student and school as a teacher. And that wouldn't be in the other thingies. It's all it's a big equation. We have to figure out what's right for you. And another thing to think about is that when I went into my school thing, a large part of what got me my job on the far end of it, this is crude, but spare me making weird sentences, because it's hard to be complex about an idea like this. But a part of it was how good I made everything look. And a lot of those tricks were things that I learned at home with like After Effects and Photoshop, and making my real package well and having good titles on it, and just having kind of good taste for texturing and things. And those are all things that I did learn at home by myself for free for years and years and years. And then I finally sort of collated those things under the sort of banner of I'm at school now learning 3D. But a lot of it was like, even though I didn't know anything about 3D software, I knew stuff about how to make fake things look realish. That helped a lot. And that did contribute a huge amount to how hireable I was. So it's not like I only got hired after I went to school because of the school. Yeah. Ad hoc, ergo propter hoc. It's more like, I learned a lot of great school stuff, and I got a great bag of habits from the teachers there but maybe I would have been able to swing some portion of the same career having just sat at home and tried. The other thing, and this is, I'll stop talking.
No
the
worries.
other thing about something like FX PhD or a school is that regardless of how seriously you're taking it, you are at least every day sitting down, being told to do a thing. And
Right.
it's not like if you're at home making your own short films now and then, you will learn things as you go along. But if there's that 2-month period where you didn't actually work on anything, that's just a giant hole in your practices.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. I mean, even if you really walked into Dave School or what have you with the basic skill set that you were going to have, just the pressure cooker environment of having to get in there and sit down and focus your attention and efforts on these projects, I would suspect would, ultimately you're going to come out of there with more stuff in hand at least, and you're probably going to pick up a number of techniques along the way. Yeah, and so personally,
you didn't go to school.
No, I didn't. Yeah,
do you generally recommend that people do?
So my sort of stock answer was traditionally has been the not unlike what you just said in that like there are lots of things that aren't even necessarily what you're supposed to get out of this on paper that are good reasons to go to school.
Right.
I didn't.
There is something to be said. Like a totally abstract thing is, at a certain point, like until you were hired at LucasArts, how much time had you spent sitting in a room with 20 other artists just knowing what it looks like to come to work today?
Right.
I mean, that's not even a thing that you were familiar with at all, because it's like I work at, and all of a sudden it's like, cool, so I have to wear pants when I come in, right? I'm just checking. I mean,
Yeah.
Whereas I had 12 months of you sit down, there's a chair, coffee's in the kitchen, take this seriously, which does shape your brain a little bit. Mm-hmm. And it does set like, it's like boot camp, but it wasn't like boot camp.
It keeps you on task at
Yeah.
least.
I mean, it shapes you for what this looks like when you do it.
Yeah.
And that is a difference from what you would just learn kind of.
I mean, I was self-taught before LucasArts in terms of, every all these little, goofball effects tests and everything that I was doing were my own education out loud for people to see in the form of 3-second clips in my backyard and so on and so forth. And I was on track to go to community college for a couple of years and knock out some general education, and then start figuring out where to head from there in terms of actually getting a big real camera in my hands and start to learn all that business. But the LucasArts opportunity sort of jumped in ahead of schedule and was a immediate opportunity to actually go and get paid to do something at least kind of like what I'm interested in doing. So obviously I took it, and that was an opportunity that not everyone gets, which I completely acknowledge. And so the question is, well, from my perspective, not having to have gone to school to learn all that stuff, where does it come from, and would I have done that? And of course, the ability to actually go into a real place, really now I'm talking about Stargate, which is just sort of a day in, day out. I'm going to be working on lots of television all the time. That was, for my money, more educational than any other option I probably could have done. And hopefully something like that is what you can get out of a good school program that does that. And so the answer to the question of how my recommendations as far as all that stuff goes was that there are still plenty. I'm not going to outright say no, I don't think you need school, but you don't need school explicitly. Like if you actually can, amass that skill set on your own in some fashion, then that's great. Nobody is really going to be looking at that on a resume as something that's a deal breaker.
Right.
That's what I'm really getting at. If you have the reel in your hand, if you can show the work that you're capable of, that's the most important thing is really it. And so if school is how you can do that, that's awesome. If, you have the opportunity to go in and just start working and work your way up and just get better and better, that's possibly an even better way.
Right. Of course, the other thing there is depending on what you come out of school with, like even back in like before the earth was cooled and I was coming out of Dave School, the number of students coming out of our class with reels that contained mostly the same thing, because the class project, like everyone did their version of a shot.
Yeah.
And everyone coming out of that school had like 1 or 2 shots that was different from everyone else. And then a lot of the ones that are like, there's 25 of this exact shot. So did you guys all work on the same? It's like, no, we all made it ourselves, but it's just the shot. One of the things that helped me was that I filled my reel with stuff that I'd done at home and random other stuff just to make it different.
Yeah.
Just because I didn't want to come out with the same reel everyone else had. And it turns out that was kind of a good move. Now that problem is, well, not, problem, but that pattern of a thing to have happen is a lot more common with places like FX PhD or Video Copilot stuff, where it's not just the 30 people that are in this room that can walk out with a reel full of the same looking thing. It's the entire world. So one of the things that will help, if you're whatever crucible you do find, whether it's a school or an online project or an online course or anything like that, just make sure that the things that you learn and the things that you can show for it are shots that demonstrate that you've learned the principle of what the tutorial was teaching you. Not necessarily that I made the macaroni and cheese that this box told me how to make, but like I learned how to cook. But the macaroni and cheese was what I happened to make. And it might be best to have your reel be maybe nothing that is just a shot from your school program or your video co-pilot work, but something that's obviously totally based on the things you learned when you did those projects. Just take them and make something new with it that the people who are going to be looking at your reel haven't seen a million times. But I guess that kind of lends itself to, you want to talk about how we eventually get hired at places?
Yeah, I was going to say it's time to talk about...
Time to go there?
The sort of central hinge point there to me is your reel. And we haven't expressly laid this out directly, but the reel is really...
What are you talking about? Like R-E-A-L? Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Real? Real?
Exactly. So the real cash value of what you're going to be evaluated by when you're a newcomer into it is...
the commodity that you are...
Yes. Is
demonstrated by what you've made.
Demo reel. Your demonstration reel, I guess.
Yeah.
As it were. And again, like I was just saying, it's really a matter of what you can show that you can do. And we wanted to have a divergent point there that sort of focuses on like video co-pilot specifically.
Yeah, just as a piece of shorthand for a thing that happens a lot.
Right, exactly. I mean, when you and I were really kind of getting started in all this stuff, that really wasn't as much of a thing as these online resources.
Big band music was popular, and we had figured out how bikes worked.
Yeah,
it was great.
But
it was the roaring 2000s.
Yes, and
it was less common to see people's reels full of the same shot.
Yeah, exactly. And
there were fewer tutorials. There were fewer places for people to learn all the same things.
Right. And so unfortunately, it's sort of an automatic red flag in a certain sense. In other words, if you're somebody looking at reels, and it's pretty easy to identify, the stock video co-pilot tutorial that you see that kids make, that's really, it's almost worse than nothing in a certain way. Because it's showing that, you can follow explicitly along a checklist of things to do and produce this result, but it does absolutely nothing to show that you actually learn the concepts and principles involved there, artistically or technically.
Yeah. To be absolutely clear, those are like real tools and you can make great things with them. But if the thing that your reel consists of is largely just the exact shot that was covered in a tutorial somewhere, we've seen that before. Mm-hmm. And also this is a kind of, like I said, please forgive my kludgy sentences here, but it's almost like applying to art school with a connect the dots kind of picture, which is like, well, yeah, but what we're looking for here is people who are creative artists who can work with the tools they have to sort of solve problems that they haven't had before. And what we're seeing here is that you took the given example of a thing to do and used the software to make the exact same thing happen. So we don't know if you've actually learned anything from that based on what you're showing us.
Right.
You got anything that we haven't seen? Because if we see an artist with a reel full of that one shot, we don't even really know anything about you, except that you thought this was gonna get you a job. It's weird because these are all things that I like. I'm not huge on plugins and stuff myself, but that's just a weird artifact of meanness. But generally speaking, these are all real tools, and these are all tools that are worth knowing how to use and using well. And they're tools that get used in pipelines. So we're not saying don't go out and learn how to do all these things based on like extant tutorial series or plugins that you found online or cool like presets. But the way that we're going to find out how good you are is by looking at your demo reel. I mean, you'll have a resume too, but at a certain point, it almost doesn't matter. Yeah. Because what you made and how it looks is what matters.
Yeah, exactly.
Who you are also matters, but we'll find that out.
They're less concerned with your backstory usually, and they're really more interested in what you can show that you can do, and that takes a funny turn later down the line after you've been at it a while, where then the reel starts to fade off, and it's really like we were talking about recommendations and sort of like what did he work on last, or what's he been doing, and then the notoriety of that project might have more value than anything else, along with the recommendation. So that's a little interesting. But I mean, especially when you're getting started and you're looking at just sort of proving your worth and trying to be able to, get into places, that's really where it starts.
When you see some person, some artist, some budding artist demo reel, and you have thoughts on it, what are the kind of things that people mess up the most? Like, what kind of mistakes do you see happening? It's like,
well, it's interesting.
That's not what you should do.
You know, but toward the end of my time at Stargate, I was in the position of supervising a big show that we were doing, a pilot, television pilot that didn't get picked up ultimately, so no one will ever know what it is. But it was insane. It had tons and tons of virtual environment stuff. It was not a small thing. And so it was to the point where we were so spread thin that it was pretty much like, hey man, can you be interviewing these people and helping to sort of figure out like who we need to bring on and who has the chops. And so I was in the position of actually looking at reels and doing hiring, and stuff like that. And so, what we've already talked about is really the biggest one is in that you just want to see someone, even if it's the same sort of technique that you're aware of, just seeing them make it their own is one big thing. A diversified skill set is another, and that's useful because there is the baseline. We need to know that you can roto if you need to. It'd be great to see if you can see you track if you need to. And so seeing a demonstration of these unique things and laid out in a way that's either everything you're looking at is their work or is cited either in a document or on the reel itself to sort of declare the roles that were at play. Maybe they didn't actually track this shot, but they did composite it or something like that. You don't want to overstep your bounds in terms of what you're claiming that you did, because that can get you in hot water.
If you didn't do everything in the shot, put a little lower third title card saying what you did on the shot. As a rule, just all the time.
Definitely.
I modeled that ship.
Yeah.
And if you textured it, you can say modeled and textured that ship. But if you didn't do everything, don't just have that shot be on your reel without comment. Or if it's like, if you have a piece of paper that comes with your reel that has like, here's what all the shots are, breakdown kind of sheet, that's okay, maybe. But just generally speaking, you do not want to even imply taking credit for work you didn't do. That's because one of these days, someone who you did that for is going to be the person who's looking at your reel going, hey, I worked on that shot too. Where's my name? And you go, crap.
That 6 degrees of separation that we were talking about, it can bite you too.
Fast.
Yeah, exactly. So, so I don't know. I mean, you can contribute to that as well.
Well, I mean, the stuff, one of the big faux pas would be if you clearly didn't do all the work on this shot and that shot is on your reel without comment about what you did on it, that's iffy. Even not insofar as showing what you can do as an artist, also like as a person, as a character thing, that is kind of, you should not treat your fellow artists that way. So generally speaking, every shot, unless you did everything, say what you did on that shot, please. Compositing, all compositing, or whatever, you can say that. Just make sure that it is said what you did. Generally speaking, a reel is going to be exactly as long as your sum total of your best work is. So if there's 45 seconds of excellent visual effects that you have done, your reel should be 45 seconds long. You should not pad it out to make it longer. You should have it be exactly as long as all your best work is when you string it out. If that happens to be 20 seconds, then what you should do is make some more shots. It can even be shots that aren't for anything, just to demonstrate skills that you have. If you know how to do great 3D tracking and that doesn't actually show up in any of the shots you did, figure out a shot, go out in the backyard and film something to demonstrate that you can do a badass 3D track and put that in there. And that's how you pad it out. You should not have anything on your reel that is even maybe bad. As far as you're concerned, only your best stuff should be on your reel, and that should be, ideally more than a minute long. Probably don't want to go over 3 minutes unless you're hyper confident or you have a whole huge array of a lot of different kinds of work. You want to find a piece of music to put it under? That's fine. Try not to get very annoying music. Generally speaking, like some sort of a cool techno track or something with a cool like 2/4 sort of snare-ish, just something that's sort of vibe.
Nothing too
just
distracting.
Music, just something that has a little bit of a vibe, has a bit of a groove, but doesn't get in the way. Like I knew kids, like someone at the Dave school had the hamster dance song. It's like, guy, who do you think you are? So put something on there if you want to, but don't go over the board with it. And a little title card. Say your name, have your email address, maybe a phone number if you want to do that. Throw it on YouTube. I mean, back in my day, we actually made DVDs, made little inserts to go in the DVD sleeve and handed those out. And I still have reels from those days that, it says Teague Chrystie and it's got like a cool render on the front cover.
Yep.
Now, I mean, I know you have a friend who has a demo reel that was just one shot, or they got hired with like a one-shot reel. Yeah. What's the story there?
Yeah, I mean,
and how does that follow under these principles?
Exactly. To reinforce your point about,
however long your good stuff is.
Yeah, exactly. It should. there's no such thing as a reel that's too short in a certain sense.
Right. It could be a still frame, actually, whatever.
Well, yeah.
Don't put it to music. That'd be weird.
Right. And so, I had a coworker at a place whose reel to another studio was a breakdown for one shot. And it was a big sort of heavy 3D compositing thing. It was a big building, and so it was all these passes and reflections of the glass and all the, fake water going. And so it was this very big, robust shot that it's all the same principles,
covered all
but
the
it's
bases.
all in one shot.
Yeah.
So it's like all these aspects of compositing that you're interested in, and I'm pretty sure he tracked it himself and everything. And so he had the nice checkerboard with the little triangles where all the track dots were and everything, and really broke it down piece by piece. It took you through all of those points. It really it checked all those boxes as it went. But it was a I think it was like 45 seconds or something, and it was just a one-shot breakdown. And he got the job and increased his pay at least 200%. So
whoa,
yeah,
that's great.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not mentioning where he was.
The point of the reel
or after.
is I want to find out how good she is at this, and this. However you get there, whatever works. Do whatever you want. In fact, I was telling a couple of years ago, I was planning on doing a thing. I had some free time and I wanted to make a new demo reel piece that was basically going to be what a year later Gravity was, so I'm kind of glad that didn't end up happening.
Oh, yeah.
But it was going to be a thing where it's like a long one-take thing where it's someone in a spaceship that's breaking apart, re-entering. And it was going to be this huge, like, one-shot sort of deal where I would do all the aspects of it, following this exact same principle, which is you're going to see how well the track works, you're going to see how well the comp works, you're going to see how well the sim looks, you're going to see how the texturing is, you're going to see how the lighting's working, you're going to see all the fog and volumetric stuff that was added in comp, you're going to see the handoffs. I mean, it's all going to be there. It just happens to be one shot instead of 25. But I mean, I've probably made half a dozen demo reels. I haven't made one in a long time because, as we were saying earlier, at a certain point that reel will fade in value and you just kind of work off of recommendation stuff. That said, a lot of what I've been doing for the last number of years has been sort of in the same orbit. So if I wanted to move on to another part of the world, somewhere else in the universe, if I wanted to work at try to get like a staff position at a features place or something like that, I would certainly have to make a reel, and it would certainly have to contain some of the best looking stuff I've done for the last few years, and maybe even some new stuff too, just because that is generally a slightly different job. I mean, at a certain point, it's not just the work that you know how to do. You understand how to get a great key when there wasn't like even an attempt made to make your life easier on set. Stuff like that will apply at a high level or at a low level, but also like your familiarity with how things are done at a high level and how comprehensive a shot you can work on before your head explodes or you panic or start peeing,
right,
is important. Because at a certain point, this is a thing that I don't really have much experience with because I haven't worked on things where there's like a giant, huge amount of 3D depth and 3D like deep compositing, nuki stuff, like kind of comps. Like that's not my world at all. And if I wanted to get work like that, I probably know how to do most of the things involved in that kind of a comp, but I've never worked on a pipeline like that. I've never worked with artists at that level. I've never worked with that software. So the things that I have like no trouble getting hired to do now would probably not get me very far in that conversation. I'd have to go back to reel mode and resume mode and like learning new things mode. So just keep your mind open. Always, like I was saying earlier, be willing to learn new software. But if you have a nice way of showing you've come up with a bunch of different things that you can do well, and you put them on a disc that makes me think that you didn't just copy them all from some other place you saw them, and you're not taking credit for people's work that isn't yours, and don't have an annoying taste in music, you should be good. That's the premise. That's the whole idea.
Yeah. And we can move on from reels, but I'll share one quick anecdote, which is just that like there's definitely something to sort of tailoring your reel to who you're applying to. Depending on what it is you're trying. I mean, if you're, for instance, you're applying for more of a motion graphics type position, you might have things that you wouldn't even put on your normal reel that you would for this,
Right.
And so you're like, I'm going to get this. I did some design for these screen burn-ins or something. Now that's suddenly relevant, and so I'm going to make a little customized reel. When I applied for Star Wars, I was really concerned about making sure that I had high-profile feature film work on it, which I hadn't had the occasion
as opposed to just a reel full of lightsaber fight shots.
As opposed to a reel full of television.
It's like, yeah, that's fine. I just like the idea of like you showing up with like here's all my lightsaber stuff, Star Wars.
that was me going into Stargate.
Am I pretty?
Yeah.
And they're like,
So it's a very nice glowing laser sword.
You tailored your reel to have all the high profile stuff.
Yeah, I just front loaded these shots from a RoboCop that I did that had like Samuel L. Jackson and Michael Keaton standing around with holograms and everything, and,
right?
And which is like, Okay, fine. That's cool.
Someone somewhere said it was okay for you to put something behind Samuel L. Jackson. That's a certain level. We kind of get it.
Yeah, and I think they look good. They're fine keys and everything. There's lots of it's good work and everything. But I've got 10 seconds of more or less the same stuff, which is redundant and a bit of a, I won't say a faux pas, but you could certainly do better. You don't want to have a lot of redundancy
in terms
on
of
your
pacing.
reel. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, okay, we got it from the first shot. We get it.
Yeah,
you're showing the same stuff
we got
again.
that you
don't
key,
need to do that. Yeah.
But the point there is almost a little bit more like
what's suddenly happening is I'm putting big A-list actors
in front of you
up there, and you're like, I was entrusted
I check out
to execute these effects, Right. And so there's something to that too,
Totally,
and now half of that's going to go away when I actually bother to cut a new reel. But hey, I got Harrison Ford's face in there.
Yeah, the next reel is going to have it's going to have like Han Solo in it. So
yep,
yeah, always, and it's going to be like the first shot, the last shot. The title page.
Open and close it.
Yeah. In fact, my demo reel is it's a headshot of Harrison Ford. It's signed by Ryan. So I have a couple things. I've been keeping notes of what we talked about so far.
Yes.
And there's actually a pair of things that we've sort of touched on that we come back to later that both sort of fit in right here.
Great.
We were talking about what it means to be a junior artist. We also mentioned prep work, roto track paint stuff.
Right.
And how those two things can be the same thing and also cannot be the same thing. Mm-hmm. First of all, do you want to talk about what junior artists means? Because that's one of those things. When I came to the industry, I didn't actually, and I didn't admit this until years later, but I didn't know what the word intern meant because I was 19 and I wasn't a doctor, so I didn't know what the word intern meant.
I'm not 100% sure I am clear on exactly what is defined by that.
I wasn't at all clear on it. I thought it meant like
I assumed
we have you working on. I gathered that it meant not getting paid. I kind of figured that out from context clues.
Yeah.
But the way people talk about it, like this is the same thing happens with profanity. Like there was a few cuss words I didn't know what they meant until years later because it's just you don't want to ask. You just want to sound like you know, so you never check in on it. It's like I thought. Well, whatever. We'll move on. But the idea behind an intern was always talked about in these sort of cagey terms about intern and free work. It's like I gather that it's not getting paid, but what's the problem really? And then, based on like my lack of information, I went into the job thinking that what it meant was you're not getting paid, but you are doing stuff that they need help with.
You're being afforded the opportunity of gaining experience in the actual
industry. In exchange
industry.
for not getting paid. Right.
Right.
But that's not what it means, or at least that's not what it meant in my case. What ends up happening for me is, to a very limited extent, I was working on visual effects. I was doing a lot of roto. I was doing kind of cooler comp stuff, and I was putting in tracer fire and dust hits and stuff on this huge like Normandy looking scene. It was in the Pacific. It wasn't in the European theater, but same scene. It was the scene from Saving Private Ryan on a TV show about a different part of the war.
Right.
But prior to that, it was a little bit of roto, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Largely things like making coffee, taking out the trash, and aside from the general indignity of that, and I'm a human being, not an animal, whatever stuff, it's also like I didn't, and still don't, drink coffee, so I didn't know how to make it. So I went to school to learn how to do visual effects. I got an internship at a visual effects company and was asked to make coffee for other people. And I was told for the first 3 weeks that I was doing it wrong, because I'm sure I was.
Coffee sucks.
Yeah, it was like I was making coffee cereal. I was putting milk and beans in a cup and handing it to people because I didn't know what they needed from me. So the idea was, at first I was kind of insulted. I was a little bit like indignant. I mean, that's the exact use for that word. It was indignant. And I was like, I don't know. I don't feel entitled. I did come here expecting to work for free. So it's not like I'm coming in here all like high horse guy, but also there are other people sitting in this room who are also interns who I know decided last week they want to learn how to do visual effects. I've been doing AE stuff for now 6 or 7 years. And I just finished a 12-month program where I spent 15 hours a day. I'll come back to that later maybe, but I wasn't doing the 5-hour thing. I was doing 5 hours and then staying the whole day for a year. So I'm super in it to win it guy. And there is no, like my supervisor doesn't know where I came from. The person who hired me is not my supervisor.
Right.
So my supervisor just thinks that we're back here being the idiots who are coming in, getting high, thinking it's video game camp, and we're going to be gone in 2 weeks.
Right.
And I was, in addition to like having barely anything to really do, constantly busy because they always had me doing stuff like clean out the dishwasher.
Go for work, yeah.
Right, exactly. And that sucked. And it lasted for, when you're in that situation, the thing that sucks about it is not necessarily that you feel like you're better than that or whatever, because come on, I don't think anyone really operates that way, but you don't know when it's going to end. Because you're not, what conversation, I mean, I tried to ask a few times like, hey guys, so I'm 19. I didn't know what intern meant. How long do you want me to do your dishes before I get to like work on a show or something.
Right.
You just sort of go along for the ride for a while. And I did end up getting hired early on. And I say early on now, but it was like 3 or 4 weeks after this process started, and it was not clear that I was going to get hired the day I came in and got hired. It was just like, oh, good, cool. But that was super like not in the cards. I just didn't know that until I moved to California.
Sure.
And that sucks. And I generally don't like the intern vibe anymore because I think one of the other things is that people who go to real college, internships are sometimes like associated with like credit sort of thing. Yeah. Whereas for me, it was just indentured servitude, old school. We're making shoes and ships and lenses in the 17th century. Kind of, you sit here, you work for a long time, we'll see if you ever learn sort of style thing. And it wasn't cool. Being a junior artist is what I would kind of consider myself once I got hired. That is like advanced beginner kind of like you understand what's happening here and you know how to do it. You are, it sounds almost, when I was in that position, I felt embarrassed to be called a junior artist, by the way, because it's like being called a kid or something.
Right.
Like it feels like all you want in the world is to be a grown up.
Oh, he's got his training wheels on.
Right. And at first I was indignant about that too. See, being young is largely just being indignant about things you don't know what you're talking about. But it turns out a really crucial aspect of being a junior artist is that it's framing you for everyone else. People will actually be more flexible and forgiving with someone making mistakes like you will inevitably make. If everyone's talking about you in terms of being a junior artist. If you were just an artist and you made mistakes like this, we'd be like, that guy's done forever. Wow. How the hell did he get this job? Bye.
Right.
Whereas it's basically like, I mean, it feels when you're in that position like someone's put a little spinning propeller cap on you and been like, all right, sport, you go get him, slugger. But it's worth it. And the longer you can kind of keep in the vibe of people are calling me a junior artist, hey, does that mean I'm not a real artist? Dude, just give over it. It doesn't matter. Just do your work, learn your thing.
Right.
And that like intern is one thing, junior artist, different thing. And then prep artist, third thing unrelated to the other two. A lot of times you'll hear prep artist or things like roto or tracking or paint being thrown around in conversations without a lot of clarity about what the, like, if there is a hierarchy, what the hierarchy would be. They're kind of different things. And there are really, really, really excellent prep artists. There are people who are better than I'll ever be at anything in my life at rotoscoping.
Yeah.
These people are amazing roto artists. And also, like, there sometimes are people who don't even know what they're doing who have been brought into roto today. Like, you know, those are the people who are, they're going to get hired for 3 weeks, think it's video game camp and leave. So rotoscoping artists and various prep artists are often dealing with seeming like they're sort of in the same camp. Totally no, not at all. In fact, a lot of the times, the things that are considered to be prep work aren't actually easy. They're harder than a lot of things are. It's things like, well, obviously you're getting tracks and stuff like that, but also like before we can do anything with this green screen shot, we need to get the tracking markers back out of it so that we have a clean version of it. Right. Or we need to get the like crew reflection out of someone's glasses, and it's a medium close up and it's a long scene. And we need that, like, before we can
it's
even
a big
do
task.
whatever.
It's going to be harder than everything else that we're doing. Like,
this is a thing that has to happen to the plate. Like prep artists, one of the contexts that it really kind of comes into play in is like, we are changing what was filmed before we do the effects on what was filmed. Where it's like, the thing here is we the whole time we're seeing this one like bright light that's kind of going back and forth right behind the side of their head, and it's a huge bokeh and it keeps eating away part of their face. And it's just like flash, flash. Can we paint that out or something? We just need that to have not happened in the first place. That's hard.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work. That's a prep job. And that's the sort of thing where someone's working on that project. Basically, it's a separate thing from the effect that's going to be happening elsewhere. Like, we're going to do a green screen or something. Whatever the effect is for that shot, that'll ultimately be happening at somewhere else. What they're doing is just changing the plate. They're fixing the plate. Things like that.
They're preparing some other aspect for the final composite, which may actually the headline of that is something totally different.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I've done a lot and paint work and stuff like that. And like sometimes, like I said, there are visual effects that are, I guess, easy, but not really. Nothing's easy. It's hard being a human. But generally speaking, stuff that falls under prep is often trickier than other stuff you'll be doing at the same time. And there's people who spend their entire career just getting excellent at that, and they get very valuable very quickly, because those are things that always come up. Like how what we're doing with the visual effects this year might be different from what we're doing with the visual effects 10 years from now, but there's always going to be a lens flare that shouldn't have been there. There's always going to be something like that where it's like, we need to get this thing done. We need to track the shot. Well, maybe in the deep future, we'll have all these tracking solutions done in some cool future way. That'll be the day. None of us are going to get work after 15 years from now. We're all dead.
Well, the good news that I'll interject that, and you might be hearing this and going like, oh, gee, there's a whole initiation process and a hierarchical build-up where you're just working your way through.
There are gladiatorial fights. We do kill one of every two. It's weird.
But the good news,
we have a special like bleeding room for the new ones.
Yeah, exactly. So like
it's not like that at all.
The good news about like prep work and stuff like that is, these just very annoying tasks.
Yeah.
Are skills that will go on and be used forever. And it's the kind of thing where
it's like being a sign painter or something.
Yeah, that lens flare that you have to paint out, 20 years from now, they'll have a lens flare they need to paint out, and it'll be the same techniques that get it done. Right. Because depending on the complexity of the shot and everything, all you're really doing is how am I going to manipulate this image to do what I need it to do? And really, this is visual effects has come into a maturity now where it's not exactly like the Old West figuring it out all the time. There's really this arsenal of tools.
We got default solutions for 95% of the problems.
Yeah, and it's you might be at home going, oh man, I'm sitting here trying to roto this guy's hair. I bet ILM has ways of doing this that are way more interesting. Maybe.
That's one of my favorite points to make.
But ultimately, it's like the real secret to that is it's 30 guys doing it for a month.
Right. Okay, I have to say this first, just for the sake of it being simple later. This is not entirely true. Because people with the ability to have proprietary scripts and stuff to run,
exactly.
That does help. Yeah. It lets you do some greater organizational things, and it helps you automate some stuff. There are exceptions to this. But there isn't a secret. ILM doesn't have a secret. It's just they're putting more hours into it than you are. That's the thing that's happening. It's a bunch of artists doing a bunch of versions, spending a lot of time doing it, and it's just that they're good at this, but it's not like they have special software that they only let you have once you've reached a certain point in your life. Mm-hmm. It's artists who do the same things you're doing it well, but it's just a team of them spending a long time on it and kind of given the time to finish it in a lot of cases. And not to make it sound like it's a luxurious process, because it's not at all. But a lot of the times, even you'll see like really crappy effects in a movie or something, and it's fun to laugh at those when you're not in the visual effects industry. But when you are, you start realizing, the artists that made that really crappy effect and that made for TV movie,
it wasn't just that they
finished that job and went off to work on Avatar or something. Like they just had 20 hours for that shot, where they had 600 hours on that shot.
Yeah.
And we're all lucky that there's color in the picture, because there was no time to do it.
Yeah. You're gonna be picking up techniques and approaches and things as you go later, but a lot of that base fundamental shit that you're learning right at the beginning is the same. I still do most of my own roto and paint tasks and things, and it's you're going right back to that same stuff you learned right at the beginning, initially in how you approach rotoing, and like just where that line strokes on the edge, and exactly, I'm going to break up the bicep from the forearm, from the neck, from the head, all the technique of that stuff is going to be completely valid all the way through the entire career that you may or may not have.
Meat and potatoes.
Yeah, exactly.
I like the idea of talking about default solutions, by the way. We talked about how at a certain point, VFX kind of gotten to the point where we have a solution for most problems. We know how we're going to do this. We know how we're going to key that thing. We know you need a talking animal head. All right, well, we know how to do that. Like we've got solutions to these problems.
Yeah.
A lot of the answers to those questions, like, hey, what is the industry standard way for replacing the green screen in the back of like a passenger window in a car comp or something? Mm. What is the industry standard? There's a couple ways you can learn that. I mean, you can guess, and you might be right. It's not like we have weird, interesting Yoda secrets. Someone figured out the right way to do it, and everyone else was like, "Oh yeah, that's it, cool." But since you don't have access to those answers, where you find them, that's where like either going to a film school where people who worked in the industry and came back can tell you that, or effects PhD, something like that. Where how am I supposed to even solve a problem like? I think of something like Anakin Skywalker's hand is burned off and they replace it with like a CG hand. Mm-hmm. That is a tricky effect to do. There's a lot of little parts there, but also every single stage of how that effect will be handled, we know how to do that. We've done things like that before.
Right.
There's an infinite number of variations on the same 5 different ways to do that, and we've kind of picked the one that we like the most. That's the kind of thing that you'll pick up just from doing it. Just the first time you do everything, you won't know how to do it, and it's scary every time. Welcome to human life. But after you've done it once, it's easier the next time and you start to get it real fast. But B, just any situation where you're learning from people who have already done this will be preferable to figuring it out for yourself for things like that. When there's like a pipeline thing, or is there a default solution? Having been around people solving problems gives you more experience to draw from, even if you weren't even the person solving them last time. If you've seen how effects get done, pretty soon you start to see the same sort of tricks happening over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So what you learn, it adds up. It does accumulate. So I'm looking at the list of various stuff here. One of the things that came up, and this is speaking of how long you have to work on a shot, this is great. TV versus feature film.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about your time frames and expectations,
right?
Work environment. I mean, what is the what in your experience? You started with games, which is weird, but then TV for years,
right? And
then a lot of feature stuff more lately.
Mm-hmm.
Just to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Do you have one you prefer more than the other?
Yeah. I mean, I enjoy feature film work. And I would like to continue doing more of it. The sort of bird's eye snapshot of that, of course, the short answer is, I guess the joke of it would be that the television is where you got 2 weeks to get all this stuff done, get it done, just getting it done is the miracle. And that's more and more true every year as these television shows get more and more ambitious.
600 shots. It's a TV show.
Yeah.
Yeah, 600 shots. Oh my God, I hate this year.
Exactly.
Can we go back to 1996? Please.
And the kinds of things
it's
that
4K,
they're doing.
it's stereoscopic, it's 48 frames per second, it's a TV show. Kill me.
But they got, like the sort of ambition of how much, real heavy 3D they're doing and stuff these days is just, it's nuts, and so there's that. And television is certainly not what it used to be. It's getting more and more toward that feature film sort of thing, which is that would be the version of, okay, well now it's 2 months and you're working on just a small handful of shots. And the critical difference there is that there'll be somebody going in there and looking at every fleck of grain, every tiny roto edge, every little detail that they can possibly, layers and layers of quality control checks and things like that. And so there's a very, and of course there's a Venn diagram here with a middle section and things like, I mentioned Crazy Horse, and they did stuff like, Black Sails and things. I did some shots for that, and that's a deep cable. That's a Showtime. It's Showtime or Stars. And so that actually was, or like a Boardwalk Empire. Things like these that are like they do all their work ahead of time, and then the show comes out later on. And so that's much more of a feature film type of
another
schedule.
One like that would be like Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly.
They're working on that for a long time.
Yeah. And so there is the same thing where there's more time that's happening, but the expectations are up in the feature film level. And the other sort of hybrid of those is commercial work, which I haven't done very much of.
I've done a little bit,
but that's sort of, they've got the budgets like a movie, and but usually not the time. And so they have the feature film expectations and the work that has to be done and the ambition, but it's all got to happen. You just throw more humans at it so you can get it done in a week and a half, because that's when they need this spot for the Super Bowl or whatever.
Yeah, that is a fair way to characterize the difference. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's that, and then personally, I feature stuff is great because to me the part that I'm getting to, which is sort of the transition from just, hey, good, I did a good job on that, nice work and everything, to the how can we really make this sing? Like what are the ideas that all the way down to the artist level we can start contributing to this to make what we're trying to do more successful.
You're moving from triage to surgery.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Kind of.
And having more of that time, having the ability to kind of like really look at it and go, okay, what are we going to do? Form more of a battle plan, as opposed to television, which is almost more reactionary in a certain way, usually. And again, we're talking about specific, corners of television and all that stuff. These aren't big.
Yeah, we are only talking about our experience. A lot of people have a lot of different experiences. We're just two people, just talking about the two ones that we've had.
Exactly. So those are sort of the key differences. And, obviously, from a beginner perspective, television has tons of work all the time. Sure. Not that features don't, but it's probably going to be a much more direct path to break into doing television work than feature work.
Yeah, TV shows you wouldn't even think of as being visual effects shows often have there are not a lot of TV shows that get aired. Right. And I mean, it's like we're flipping a house. It's like, yeah, maybe a little bit. maybe a little bit of work in there. But generally speaking, like even like a procedural cop show where there isn't like Gollum or something, yeah, there's probably 200 effect shots in that show.
Oh, things like, yeah, exactly.
Camera painouts, reflections, all kinds of tracking removal, gunshots, squibs, circs, all kinds of stuff is constantly happening. There is work. We got work for you if you can do it.
And just down to even a show that wouldn't
so
otherwise...
many TV shows.
Even shows that really try hard not to have effects, you know, half the time they go in a car and drive somewhere.
Yeah.
It's a blue screen or a green screen.
Yeah.
And, you know, even stuff out windows now. Sitcoms have effects.
I've done a lot of weird big effects on sitcoms. And it's like, the show is the same show every week. How do they not account for this one thing? It's like, because S happens, man. I mean, this is the world we live in.
Well, and you're kind of coming at it from the direction of fixing production issues, which is totally a thing on everything.
Oh yeah.
But you know, even just, you know, comedies that you would not associate with being effects heavy stuff, you know, have more than you would imagine, and that's true of television too. I'm working on a Seth Rogen comedy right now. That's you know, it's certainly not going to be thought of as a visual effects movie, but it's hundreds of shots, of course.
Yeah.
So
yeah. One of the things, now let me ask you a question as if, because this is the kind of thing that might not be clear.
Hit me.
Do you get paid more on TV than film or vice versa? Is that how things get divided up?
I think the correlation is that the caliber of work that you need out of an artist for feature work generally entails artists that
are harder to find
at a higher rate.
Yeah, sure.
So that's a little backwards.
There is a correlation.
Yes, exactly. But that is not.
Yeah, it follows.
Exactly. And again, one more reason why breaking into television is an excellent entry point, because it's the sort of thing where you can get in there at a junior rate that's very affordable, and so that's you know, much more reasonable for them when they're looking around at people to hire for this kind of stuff, as opposed to features. They're like, we don't have a lot of time to waste. We got plenty of people who are really interested in working on the next Transformers or whatever,
right.
And you can get those people. So yeah.
Now, you also end up in a situation, and I don't know how much this plays into either of them, but talking about how even TV shows are having more effects work now than movies used to have.
Right.
Is that you'll also get into situations where multiple vendors are working on the same show.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that happens with movies all the time. Like an example would be, we're having one company make the CG King Kong, but we can have a lot of companies do the green screen of the shot that we're putting, like Naomi Watts. Yeah. We're taking Naomi Watts out of the green screen. We're putting it into CG King Kong. The CG King Kong, one company's going to do that. Someone else is going to do the green screen.
Right.
Sort of thing. That kind of vendor shifting happens a lot. And now it's kind of common everywhere. And you get companies that sort of specialize in thing A and specialize in thing B.
Mm-hmm. And even if it's not in the same shot like that, it's the kind of thing where, this whole sequence we're sending to these guys. It's its own thing. It's got its own needs. It's very ejectable and sort of partitionable work. You know?
Right. And a lot of the TV stuff, I mean, I've spent most of the last 4 or 5 years working on TV-sized shows. Worked on a lot of Person of Interest, a lot of Revolution, Almost Human, Constantine, that JFK thing on Hulu with Franco.
Mm-hmm.
That was a show that we worked on. Things like that, where it's big, real network shows that I don't know who's watching these shows. Like, it's always these great shows that are like these huge prestige, like NCIS and stuff, where it's like, that's a huge show. I've been hearing about that for years. I don't know anyone who watches that show.
You don't personally.
Yeah, it's just weird. No, I'm not making a comment about the show. I'm making a comment about my sphere of friends, where it's like, it's just so much media. There's so much media that there's an entire huge show that I've heard about my entire life, basically, CSI. It's like, I don't actually know anyone who's watching CSI every week. Where are these 17 million viewers a week coming from?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, they're everywhere, man. They're all around you.
They're your parents, dude.
Yeah. But the TV stuff is serious work. You can find a lot of it. It's also, generally speaking, there is so much happening, and even so many vendors. I mean, there is so much of it happening. It shouldn't be out of anyone's reach within a couple of years of really starting to get serious to end up working on that kind of thing. And from there, like I said, find the lily pads, but it's all pretty doable. In fact, it's gotten to the point now where I will not say anything like it's easy to get in, because I don't think it is, but there are a lot of things that need VFX these days, and there are a lot of ways to learn VFX these days. Mm-hmm. And it's that kind of annoying thing where it's like you're at a Comic-Con panel and someone asks, insert director of movie here, how should I get started? And the director's like, you have an iPhone and YouTube. What are you asking me for? Just go. Right. And everyone's like, come on, man, I needed advice. And the answer is, no, that's the advice. That's the real advice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for me to say there are a bunch of jobs out there and there are a bunch of ways to learn the stuff, that's kind of annoying. It's true. Just go for it. You can get in there. and there's plenty of work to be had. I don't know necessarily. I don't think of TV and film as being something where like you can graduate from one to the other. They're almost like separate tracks. It's almost like
yeah, but you're gonna have a much better chance applying to feature work if you have a body of television work.
That's true. That's definitely true. Yeah. I mean, having a reel worth of good stuff.
Regardless, and that's true going all the way back to getting your first job. It's again what we were saying about if you could build your own reel out of bullshit you made up, that still demonstrates the skills. You're good.
Right.
You know that can get you there, and so. Sort of same thing. You just level up every time. You just keep adding better stuff to your reel, and hopefully you keep doing work that's better than the work you did before, and so you get to keep sort of upgrading as you go.
I've worked on a few movies. It's been mostly TV stuff and music videos and also weird side projects for me. I'm working on The Circle right now, and I worked on like maybe 5 or 6 random features, mostly doing random stuff, mostly because someone who I've already worked for a bunch of times was like, hey, we're working on a movie now. You available? And then that's sort of how that happens. But another thing we didn't really talk about in the conversation about getting hired and reels and resumes and all that stuff, we didn't talk about how often you find yourself, I'm working at company J, and then I wrapped up on my show, but company J had something else going on, and I came on just for this one thing, except right when I was about to leave, they got something else. And instead of it being a thing where it's like, cool, I got to go find another job again, you kind of end up in the dishwasher and just sort of spinning around a few times in the cycle before you get kicked back out again. That is another part. It's a significant part of my work experience has been you think you've just solved your like 2 months problem. You just hit snooze on the panic mode. It's like, cool, I got a job for 2 months. And what ends up happening is you're there for 10. Sometimes that does happen. Generally speaking, don't plan on being there for a long time, because the thing with VFX, in case this hasn't kind of clicked, is that it's not 1975 anymore. Like I was raised in a world where you get a job, you do that job, and that's your thing. It's like the old world, like whistling the Union song job life. And all of a sudden I'm in this industry where what ends up happening is you only get to work when there's something for you to do. You only get paid when you're working. And it's not like this movie is going to be being made forever. So what ends up happening is you go, you get a great job, you do a great job, no one has a problem with you at all, and they fire you 2 months later.
Right.
All the time. Like that is what your life is. And it does take, that sounds like it might, if you're outside looking in. I'm assuming most of us are people who do effects
if
at some
you're
point
still
anyway.
listening.
Yeah, but that can sound a little scary, or also like you need to sort of brace yourself for it. It doesn't feel like that. It is scary to not know where your next paycheck's coming from. But when we're done with you, it is usually a sort of like, firm grip on the shoulder, sort of, hey, all right, thank you for all your work and we're good, and I'll think of you in the future, sort of thing. It's, slap you on the ass. Not really, you get fired, but no, you're already fired. Slap everyone's ass. But it is sort of like a friendly, affectionate sort of laying off. It's not like go pound sand.
It's not like getting fired.
Yeah. It's more like, and there's all sorts of funny euphemisms for like going dark. Like you hear about things where it's like in corporate world, it's like we're downsizing. We've moved to another like a strategy location, and we don't need your contribution anymore. It's like in Hollywood, it's all stuff like we're going dark for a little while. The show is returning in a few months, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes this lack of clarity is just sort of cagey, euphemistic language, so that we're not saying, hey, we don't need you, please don't come in. And also sometimes they just don't know what the schedule is going to be. Like it's not like there is someone who knows.
They don't know either.
Yeah, it's not like there is someone who knows and you just don't get to. We're all fighting a battle against this movie and we don't know when it's going to die, sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Talking about triage and surgery, it's weird how all my like analogies are these weird life or death situations where you're pitted against the project. But you end up in situations where people you like and people who like you don't need you anymore, and that's it. And that is kind of scary. Getting the rug pulled out from under you. Like it happens often enough that like you didn't see it coming at all and they're done with you, that you do kind of have to keep that in mind as a possibility. But generally speaking, you feel it coming. You generally know within 2 or 3 weeks when they're going to be done with you. You can tell when a project's winding down, usually. And you can, generally speaking, sort of predict when a thing is going to be done with, which means you can, generally speaking, sort of start putting out feelers towards the end of a project and go, hey, I think we're going to be done here in the next few weeks. Do you guys need What are you guys working on? Is there any room over there? I'm looking for a new place to go, etc.
And people are pretty cool about it. Like they understand that this is the process. That would be weird in any other industry,
but everyone in this industry does that exact thing. So there is no weirdness there. You can go, hey, I'm about to wrap up here. You guys got anything you're working on? I'm just hitting the normal bases. Get me back. Like that kind of email.
Right.
I send 10 of those a year. Well, actually, it happens a lot, is what I'm saying. And it is not weird. It is formalized. It is maybe not ideal, but that is the industry we have.
The interesting, to contrast you with my experience and the whole agency thing.
Yeah, now you get the agent.
Yeah, the agent factor. What's kind of nice about that is that it's formalized from the beginning. And so what we do is we always sort of declare a start date and an end date, even if we don't necessarily need one, just to sort of have a range on paper so that as we approach that theoretical end date, we should be done with this project by May 1st or whatever. Okay, great. So as we come up on May 1st. They pick up the phone and like, how's it going? Everything on track for that? Everything cool? And then like, oh, you know what? We need to extend a hold for a week or 2 weeks or something like that. And then it's all, it can be very formal. Now it's totally possible to do that yourself. And I know folks who do it to that level with spreadsheets
you have to
and
be
everything.
So responsible.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm nowhere near that responsible.
But it's really nice to be able to have that kind
someone
of
else
thing
who's focused on
paper.
it.
Well, yeah,
right.
Absolutely. But whether you're doing it yourself or with by way of agency or something, just sort of having a target end date in mind that you kind of keep bringing up, and just sort of like, okay, well, right. This is what I'm expecting here, right? And, it just sort of keeps things nice and clean and lets you focus on what's coming up next and that kind of stuff. And that is how the whole business turns and operates. Is it's constantly in flux with everybody moving everywhere, and they get it. Like you could mention to your boss, like that you're looking for work at your next place, and it's not taken personally or offensively.
Right. They're not like, hey, you're thinking of leaving?
Yeah.
No. Yeah, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
End dates are crazy, and that's one of the other things about. We were talking about the timelines that are different between movies and TV. It's not necessarily like you get to like. I had speaking of how these skills are sort of interrelated with tributary fields. One of my friends that I went to the Dave School with went to school for VFX and ended up in games, and he's been in games ever since. And now I don't ever know where he's working now, but big games companies, and he's used a lot of the same skills, also things he knows about worlds and game building, and I don't even know what the actual credentials are, but you start from one place and you end up on different sort of trajectories depending on what your interests are. Usually you're like more than half in control of that, but who knows? Sometimes you just get yanked and that's what happens. But a game, you tend to be working on that for a long time. There are artists that work on a game for 3 years. Whereas with a movie, rule of thumb, could be 3 months to 7 or 8 months, could be more than a year.
The people who are on longer than that are usually ones who are kind of there from the start or on staff or permalance or whatever.
You'd be in sort of like the 3 month to 5 month zone, seems to be kind of common. Whereas like a TV show, generally speaking, unless it's like a one-off, like there's a sequence in one episode that's weird or something, if you're getting hired for a TV show, you're working for a company and the company gets the whole season.
Yeah.
So that does end up actually being kind of a months and months deal, and you end up, that's how you, in like the first 3 years of being on Stargate, your IMDb went from like 6 things to like 580 things.
Yeah, right.
Where it's just like, here's 25 episodes of The Office, here's 25 episodes of show B. I didn't think of an example before starting the sentence, now I'm trapped. Here's 25 examples of episode 3.
Yeah.
Whatever. And the job, like when I'm working on the TV stuff that I've been working on lately, I end up like 7 months at a stretch. Just, I don't even have to think about getting hired. So you'll find your little rhythm, and it's fine.
Yeah,
you'll end up in a place that makes sense.
I mean, it's like, obviously it's where, again, from the sort of beginner outside looking in sort of thing, it's like, just get ready for the part where you're not gonna be sitting in one seat for too long. Yeah. Like it's a naturally in flux sort of industry.
My first year, I didn't have an instinct for any of these things. I was panicky. I was worried that I was being rude by leaving. I was worried that I was being rude about talking about future jobs at a certain place.
Right.
Because it's like, at that point in my life, the only thing I had that was anything like an analog for this was relationships. And it's like, you don't talk about your next girlfriend with your current girlfriend. That's weird.
Exactly. Yeah.
But once you set aside most of my twitchiness there was just, I didn't know if I was doing the right thing kind of in terms of etiquette and like the social contract. The answer is be cool, be considerate, be awesome, be polite. But it's cool. We get it. And
for sure,
you'll play it by ear and it'll be fine.
It really, and now we may sort of back out to sort of big picture-y kinds of advice or thoughts on the industry and the shape of it and everything, but
Sure.
I mean,
There's one thing that I can see kind of spending between here and there.
oh yeah, okay, sure.
Well, it's on your list here, but talking about what can happen sometimes, especially in situations where the timing or we didn't know what the schedule was going to be, but oh God, is that you can end up in these situations for days or weeks or months where you're working huge, crazy long hours.
Of course.
And there isn't a union or like a trade group or anything that sort of prevents you in some like meaningful from top down way from working an assload of overtime, and then they're weird about the overtime. They don't pay it right, or they don't divide it right, or like there's weird loopholes that you only find out about later, and it's kind of gross and cutthroat and mean and evil.
Oh, really?
There's that kind of stuff. I mean, it's not an above board thing. At bigger places, that doesn't seem to happen, but I've had it happen to me at smaller places.
I'm sure I'm relatively insulated from that at this stage.
At this stage, oh yeah, hell yeah.
Well,
but also more specifically,
point,
I mean, it was to talk about like OT weirdness and Sharky stuff. That's fairly rare. There are a couple. I mean, you have an example of that kind of thing happening, sort of. But generally speaking, I was just talking about long hours in terms of your life and how sometimes you'll end up in the trenches.
Oh, yes.
And that is part of it. And generally speaking, the company will be above board, and that will be a period in your life where you are exhausted and like...
You are trading your life for cold, hard cash.
Yeah, and it does pay pretty well if you're in that zone, working like 16-hour days for a weekend on end. Mm-hmm. What's the long... Have you ever worked for more than 24 hours straight?
Yes.
Have you ever worked for more than 36 hours straight? My longest longest billed day was 21 hours.
Oh, on Star Wars, it did a 32-hour day.
Wow.
Yeah, we all did. We all stayed over the night, and this was, of course, after already enormously
that wasn't day
long
one.
Hours. Yeah, that was not. That was already deep into the schedule where we had been in the trenches for some time and we're hurting
32
already.
hours.
So, yeah. So that was just, we went home in the afternoon and said, all right, we got to call it for today and come back tomorrow. It was getting a delivery, of course. It's always getting a delivery.
Yeah, of course. Because there's no one else who's going to do it if you aren't there to do it. Like that's one of the things about when you get in a situation where it's a small team and we got a big job to do here. It's the same as being like a surgeon. It's like being on call. It's like, if I don't come into work today, it's not like someone else will pick up the slack. I was the one with those shots. Mm-hmm. They're my shots. They're my half done projects. If I'm not in there, they get screwed. So we're all in this together. Let's do it. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of a cool win. Like it sounds terrible, but it's kind of awesome. It's cool to be in there. It's cool to be in there with that. It's dynamic.
Yeah. It's certainly an experience that I don't care to repeat too many more times in my life. Just don't have it in you physically, at a certain point. I mean, that was a 100-hour week, over 100-hour week.
That's,
now that adds up when you start calculating the rate out and everything. So that's how you kind of can walk away from it and go, all right, cool.
Generally speaking, with the way it works, I am most familiar with a model that goes, you get paid whatever you get paid for the first 8 hours.
Yes.
And then there's, depending on the place, it'll be the next 2 hours or the next 4 hours. Some period of time after 8 hours, you'll get paid time and a half. And then after some, whatever that second threshold is, you get paid double. It doesn't keep going after that. Double is where it tops out. Although, depending on how your contract's set up, if there's a certain number of hours in a week, maybe. Although I don't think after 32 hours.
Yeah, that was interesting. I had to ask the accountant about exactly.
Hey, is there like a quadruple time or something? Like, where are we at here?
Yeah. Well,
am I getting paid on a log scale now?
So, and your mileage may vary depending on where you are in the country, but the California law is 8 hours of your standard time. After that, up to 12, it's time and a half.
Right.
After 12, it's double, and that's just it. This is not a unionized thing where you can get into golden time and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So there's that, and then there's also business about the 7th day that you work.
Right.
Or 6th day. I think it's
consecutive
the 7th.
day.
Yeah, consecutive days. That has a different thing. And so and those are things you want to see how each place sort of handles. But if they're not doing at least that, you should be a little suspicious because, again, that's a California law thing, not a business to business sort of thing.
Actually, that brings up a kind of a nice segue to the idea of when you're setting up prior to when you hooked up with DAA, and now you got Peeps. When you're setting up a contract, when it's like, hey Ryan, we want you on. We got a TV show called Teague's Awesome Colgate Hour. We think it's going to be great. We want you for 20 weeks. You available? Let's get started right now.
Right.
What kind of stuff do you go, okay, well, let me ask you a couple questions first. I want to make sure the ducks are in a row. What kind of things do you end up kind of having to lay out every time with every new job?
I mean, I got to say, most of my experience is going into an existing place that is quite happy to have that all laid out and be presented to you with.
They come at you where it's like, all right, so here's how we do it. We average 400-hour weeks, and there's not paid lunch 10 hours a day.
Yeah. That's you want it or don't.
Yeah, exactly.
So in more of a scenario where it's like you might be perhaps a little earlier in your adventures into visual effects and just hooking up with folks like on Craigslist who are just
or little one-off gigs.
Yeah, exactly. And they're just doing their own thing and they just need to get it done, and they hear a VFX guy who you pay money to then provides visual effects work to you in exchange for said money, and then you have completed your project that you're working on. Or
it's like selling cocaine, except it's visual effects, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing.
It really is, because it's an outside vendor that's supplying a service. That's the whole. That's one of the key differences between the rest of the filmmaking process and visual effects.
It's like we're painting your house or something. We just do this once.
Yeah. So you could probably speak more to, if you're kind of attempting to define your own terms, where you might want to start.
Well,
with
the conversation, the specifics, I leave to you. But here's what the variables are. I always like to find out. Now, this might not even be something that occurs to you, but it's important to me because I like knowing the answer. When I'm hashing it out before I'm about to start, it's like they're going to hire me on for Teague's Happy Fun Colgate Hour, which sounds like a great show. I haven't heard anything about it, but I like the producer. I always say, all right, where do I park? When I'm coming in on Monday, where do I park? That's a question I used to not ask, and now I ask every time, because in Los Angeles, sometimes they expect you to like stand your car on one end. Sometimes they want you to like put it on the roof. There's really weird parking shit, and I like to not have to ask. So I always, every single time.
And it's always in Culver City, and there is no parking.
Right. And can your car shapeshift? No? All right. Well, there's an interdimensional valet. So I always ask, where can I park? That's one thing, for instance, that generally speaking, I like to ask.
Who do you ask for when you get in there? I guess I'm thinking of an interview, actually.
Yeah.
Same questions.
But among other things like that, what I like to know is, what are your weekly expectations? Because sometimes, like,
in terms of hours?
The 1975 version of this is you work a 40-hour week.
Oh, yeah.
I have found, like, of my, we'll say, 30 or so VFX jobs that I've had, maybe 2 of them were a 40-hour week. And like they said that up front, and they were right about it. Usually it's like 50 or 60 hours as sort of a default thing.
Yeah.
Is we work 10 hours every day.
Yeah, exactly. 10 hours every day, and then the weekend, hopefully not, but hey.
Never know. Sometimes it's 12, and all of these things you are allowed to have an opinion about, but you're not allowed to be a dick about it after you've had that first conversation. You're not allowed to like agree to it and then later be like, what did I do? Right. What you do is you shut up and you work the whole gig, and then you don't agree to that next time if you didn't like it.
Yeah. Or what I've gotten a couple times is they look you right in the face and they go, "We're looking to bleed you dry and get as many hours out of you as we possibly can. We'd like for you to have no life outside of this place."
At which point you say, "Well, that's great," and you talk about what are your specific. And this is awkward. This is one of those things where I gave up on caring how I felt about asking these questions, and my life was better afterwards.
Yeah.
Is you say, what is your arrangement in terms of payment, both in terms of like, are you doing the real 8 hours, 12 hours, double time thing? Because if not, I want to know that now. But also secondarily, when they give you a check, how long between the period of days that you're getting paid for and when you get that check is referred to as net. Net 30 would be, we have 30 days after you did that work to give you a check. We will pay you every 2 weeks. It's net 30. That means they're giving you a check every 2 weeks. And that check pays for something.
It should be coming no later than 30 days.
30 days after the last day you worked.
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes it's a thing where it's like we like to pay every week, but it's net 60, which is weird. And also sometimes this is generally speaking like an agreement that they have with their accounting company. This isn't about you really. It's just to give you a sense of it won't be any later than if it's net 30 days, if it's net 60 days. I've often found in situations with real companies, they'll say it's net 30, but it's like, they file it the next day and you get it 6 days later or something like that. So it doesn't necessarily mean you won't get it for 30 days. It means you can't get mad at us until day 31, but it's probably going to be fine.
Right.
I ask about the payment. And like I said, we were saying earlier, it ends up being, if you were getting paid $1 an hour, for the first 8 hours, you're getting paid $1. From hours 8:01 to midnight, you're getting paid $1.50 for each one of those hours. And then after that first 12 hours, you're getting paid $2 an hour until you die or go to sleep and come in the next morning, at which point it goes back. And then there are some arrangements where if you've done that for 6 consecutive days, you've unlocked God mode or something, but that's going to be dependent on the job. Finding out all these things can usually be summarized in the question, what is your payment schedule? What are your time frames? What is the overtime situation? And whoever you're talking to will fill you in gladly with all those things without you having to be specific.
Yeah. You may have to ask for the HR person, but there's going to be somebody who is more than happy to lay it all out for you, even at your interview stage, potentially.
Yeah. Usually might be people are squeamish about that. And then they do it for a while.
When you have to do it so many times, you really get over it.
Yeah, it's like, exactly. It's the price of doing business. We're used to having that conversation, and it's fine. I will find out what we're going to be working on. Generally speaking, I want to know who I'm going to be working for in terms of like a organizational chart. Sometimes
know who your superiors are and who to go to for what.
Because it's one of those things where like your superior might be that guy, but there are 15 people who work here, and you're just a freelancer, and they all seem to talk to you like they get to be your boss, and it's not clear who is less ignorable than others. Mm-hmm. And also like sometimes like your supervisor and his supervisor are like, you talk to them all the time, and then the owner of the company walks by and says something. And it's like, well,
is that a trump card or what?
So I always like to find out in advance who are my superiors and whose advice should I take under consideration, but not actually hold myself to.
Right.
Find your way of saying that, but that question, I found that it's worth asking that question. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, that's kind of it. Like you're going to show up, you're going to do the thing. Most jobs end up being almost the exact same thing with a few details different. You're going to be sitting in a rolly chair probably. It's going to have that sort of, you can bend it back however you want. Although some places, if you've been there for a while, you get a standing desk, you get a ball to sit on, you can do whatever the hell you want. You're going to end up probably getting a lot of places, depending on how crazy it is, what team you're on, where the show's at in terms of its overall completion. Maybe they'll buy you lunch every day. I've been at 2 jobs where they buy you lunch every day. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, they don't.
It shouldn't be assumed.
Yeah, it should not be assumed that they're going to buy you your pad thai. But a lot of the times, there isn't like at noon, we have recess, and then at 1, we have PE, and then at 2, we have lunch sort of arrangement. But there is like, everyone seems to get up around noon, and kind of, they form little sort of groups of, hey, we're going to walk across the street, get food over there. Or maybe like everyone brought food, but we're going to sit down. We're all going to kind of have lunch together-ish. But it isn't you give someone a menu and they come back with your food later sort of deal. It's more like we're all informal artists who all get hungry roughly in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And hey, you have eyes and a mouth, and maybe I can talk to you about things unrelated to our show. Hi. That's going to happen pretty much every job, sort of the same way.
And that's great. It's, I'm at a place right now where there's not much of a lunch thing that really happens. Is people generally kind of bring their own stuff, and they work straight through. And by not taking a lunch hour, you get out an hour early because they're looking for X many hours out of you that day. Right. Boy, I miss the camaraderie and interaction of getting outside in the sun for a few minutes and going somewhere and being outside of the workplace just to be able to chat and mingle with your coworkers and get to know them on a more personal level. It's a good break for you mentally in the day, and that's a big thing.
Also, it's a team.
Yeah,
knowing these people.
Yeah, and scheduling wise, the only other real critical thing is, when do they start? Like, what is it? 10 o'clock. And I think it's symptomatic of being in this area is like most places are 10.
Most of my jobs have been 10. The ones that haven't been 10 have been 9, and there's like 2 outliers. It's almost all 10. The rest are 9, generally speaking.
And often places it's a little loose, it's kind of a soft start thing. It's like, they understand they got people coming in on a long commute. They're going to get in. There's going to be traffic some days and not others. And they're often pretty cool about the fact that, well, if you got there a half hour late, stay a half hour late.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
Make the hours just happen. It's more about getting it done. And that's kind of a nice thing about it is it's really not so corporate usually, depending on the place. It's more about results. It's about, can you get this done in the time? Like, hey, if you get done an hour early, you leave an hour early for all we give a shit, Like, hey.
And hand in hand with that does go, when you know that this is not going to get done without you doing it and it's due tomorrow, they will expect you to know that and not need to be told, hey, you can't just punch out.
Yeah.
There's a real schedule outside of your life that this is adhering to.
Communication there
that's part of what's going to happen here.
Yeah. And I'll throw that out there too, that just sort of generally, now that I've actually had a bit more experience in freelancing and working place to place, is that communication is always good. There's no such thing as at the end of the day, no one's going to be like pissed off at you for going, oh, hey, by the way, here's where I'm at on this shot you assigned me. I've done this, and that. I have this to do tomorrow. I'm feeling pretty good about it by Wednesday, I think. We'll have a temp we can show off and see what the client thinks about it. That kind of conversation it's regarded as very professional. It keeps everyone informed. Yeah, you want to touch base and make sure everybody knows what's going on and be friendly. Be a likable guy. or girl.
Yeah.
You
When
know?
you are first aware that, oh God, I told them 4 days and I'm looking at this and I can already tell you it's going to be like 7. It's day 2 and I'm nowhere. I suddenly realize why I was wrong and that I was wrong. How do you broach that topic? How do you?
Yeah, no, that's a good.
We said we'd show it to them on Friday and it's Wednesday and it's not.
That's a good question. You probably ought to have a good reason, and usually there is one if you're going to be caught.
Was wrong.
Yeah, if you're going to be caught that off guard by it, like there's probably something you can point at. And you know what? The thing is too, there's a lot of sort of. When I was younger, anxiety about people coming up to you asking you when something is going to be ready.
Yeah.
You have that instinct to go, give me maybe in a couple of hours I could have some. Don't paint yourself into a corner like that. People understand if you go, well, you know what? This roto really came out and bit me because of this, and that, and this isn't going quite. People understand that it's a process that you're working your way through, and it doesn't always go as foreseen. And as long as you can articulate to them in a way that they understand that it wasn't because you were just sitting there on YouTube the whole time instead,
right.
They're generally receptive. And if you go and you say, oh, you know what? It's not going to be today. I think tomorrow by lunch I could have this. That's important information for them to go, oh, okay. We need it tonight for realsies.
Right.
Every single one of those aspects of things that you're trying to do. So let's figure out what we need to do about it. And the answer to that can save you.
Yeah.
That can be okay, let's get Johnny over here in the corner on Roto for you, and maybe we can have suddenly it's like damage control is deployed around you to help you get it done, because no one wants to screw you in that way. They want it to be successfully completed, however that needs to happen.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
So don't again, just don't feel like you can't tell them what's really going on, because it's usually important.
Yeah, it's better for everyone to be on the same page.
Yeah.
One of the things, I forget where I heard this first, but it was called the Scotty principle of project time estimation, which is that I think it must refer to Star Trek, but it's multiply your repair estimates by a factor of 4.
Right.
Where it's like, how long is it going to take? You think it's going to take 1 day, 4 days, and it's not like you'll always need all 4 days. But then when you said 4 days and you're done 3 days early, it's like, oh, all right, cool. Mm-hmm. Now, to a certain extent, you also want to make sure that you are writing a good line, but also factor in that you don't even always know how long a thing is going to take, even when you know what the steps are, and that sometimes you get a thingy. So what I generally do is I'll say twice as long as I think, because I find that 4 times is more than I ever need. So that's just being mean. But I'll usually say, it's like, if I think it's going to take 5 hours, it's like, I think we're about 10 hours of work here, and another part of this conversation is, depending on the project and whether or not, like tomorrow morning, it really does have to be done, so we can't do tomorrow thing, is you can say, I usually start answering that question in terms of how many hours I think it'll take, not how many days.
Yeah.
It's like, I think it's 12 hours of work here. Now, if you're like 6 hours of work into your day, that gives the supervisor a few different options. They can go, all right, well, I don't want you to work overtime on this because we are budgeted in a certain way and we weren't anticipating spending that much money on this. And I happen to know, being me and being the supervisor in the situation, that we can wait until tomorrow and it's fine. And what they'll say is, cool, finish it up tonight. Don't go into OT on this. Just pick it up where you left off in the morning and get it done as soon as. Or they might say, are you available for OT? Meaning you may not leave. Generally speaking.
Yeah.
Meaning we really need you to stay here now. And also I've ended up in situations where it's like every night, sort of without even asking what you're working on, it's like, you available for OT tonight? Which is sort of like,
right.
I wish this has been brought up in the interview, because on a certain level, like, it is dickish for them to sort of force your hand like that. I mean, you understand it, but it's like they would have known, generally speaking, how underwater they were on their whole schedule here. And they could have said, hey, we're basically looking for a lot of OT every day.
Hopefully, yeah.
And they brought you in with whatever they said, and it turns out every night we're asking for OT. It's kind of dickish of them to do that. On the other hand, it's also dickish because it would be impolite for you to spend too much time saying, no, I'm not available for OT. The implication there is, we need your help. And the point there is, within the realm of a reasonable thing for me to do in this situation, like, I'm not going to give you my life or anything like that. I'm going to do my best to try to make sure that you guys get through this. And I want to make sure that this, I'm
trying to be a team player.
I'm trying to be a team player here.
Yeah.
I am bound by some weird old samurai honor to say, yeah, I'm in for whatever we need to do. And the hand in hand part is that you're not supposed to ask me for OT every day. You should have just told me when we were signing up. It's like, here's what's happening. It's going to be a long day. Now, that was a situation where I was literally asked for like every day for weeks. And it wasn't even really an emergency thing. It's just they liked people working 12-hour days instead of 10. And it's like, you guys going to be around for OT tonight? It's like, you asked me that yesterday, and it was like there wasn't even a crunch. We're just, what's going on here?
Right.
It's like you should have just framed it differently.
You should hopefully be feeling it in the atmosphere of the place that it needs to be happening. I mean, I have sort of two versions of that. So one place, I'll mention them by name, I suppose. Is Encore Effects, and they have a number of offices. They have a Los Angeles one, and they also have a Burbank one, which I worked at for a number of months on the Supergirl pilot and the TV show The Flash. And they're a pretty big place, and it's owned by Deluxe, and so it actually was one of the sort of, I guess it was the biggest, most sort of giant machine type place that's just churning out lots and lots of work, and it's all really good, and they got a lot of talented people in there, and it's a well-oiled machine that's been going at it for a while, and they really know how to approach these things.
I'm picturing like those like stock footage shots of a car getting assembled with all the arms.
Pretty much that, except all just with like people
TV
on
shows
computers.
just like sliding past on conveyor belts.
Right. Here's the Flash. Yeah.
Season 2, episode 1. Season 2, episode 2.
And so that was actually really nice because on the one hand, it's nice to sort of plug in anonymously into this machine and just do good work, and everybody's in it together. And so this is one of the ones where it was like, listen, we got a big pilot we're pushing through, and we're doing all these other shows. It's going to be a lot of hours. We're going to be asking for a lot of overtime. Yeah. Okay, cool. And that was nice.
But that gives you the point of that being that would be an opportunity for you to say,
that's not going to work for me, or whatever.
Sorry, I have a kid or something.
Exactly.
Like I can't do that. Your 16-hour-a-day business.
Yeah. And so the nice part about that was, somebody would come by with a clipboard on a daily basis and be like, so can we get any overtime from you tonight? And it was done in a nice way.
Yeah,
that
that's
was
a different
like,
context.
Yeah,
That's
it was
fine.
like, yeah, I can give you 2 hours. Oh, you know what? I can only do one because I got to go do this thing, or and you
Framed
weren't
that
getting,
way. It's great because then you're even allowed to get a short day. Sometimes you're like, I really can't tonight, and they're not allowed to be like, hey, that's not okay,
right?
Because every night you're in there all day long. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that sounds livable.
That's the nice version of how that can go, and it was great. And I put in tons of hours there and everything, and it was great. But it was definitely, the rising tide in all boats. Just like everybody was in it together, and so generally everybody was working similar overtime hours and stuff. And so there's at least the camaraderie of being in the trenches together. And then on the flip side of that was another place much smaller. With a smaller team, where really the big pressure there was it's you and 6 other guys who are going to have to get this done somehow, and you're looking around and there is no bigger, broader plan at work here. This is just you're looking at it, and so it's kind of like everybody knows the schedules that we're up against and what we're trying to do, and and it's really more self-imposed, just like
you are the A team, make it happen.
Yeah, and it's like that's well past though. It doesn't matter what it costs. It just needs to happen and get done, and please do it, and we'll take every hour we can get out of you. And that was I've never worked harder than that, although I worked more hours on Star Wars, I would say.
Yeah, that's rough, man. And I've had a few like horror stories in terms of working conditions, and this is no fun. I've had a few of them. None of them are super bad, but also like they're. It's amazing how much of an effect it can have when you are in a work situation that it is different in some meaningful way than what you signed up for.
Right.
That is worse than like a really bad one, but you knew what you were getting going into it. It is worse to be like every day you're surprised that you're going to be late by like an hour and a half going home. Right. Every day. Oh my God. Like things like that get at you more than like, all right, well, I know this is going to be a crazy show. We're in it for long hours. That's, being surprised. And my point here is that it's actually what makes for a bad job or like a horror show kind of job isn't hours. It's vibe. It's this weird ethereal thing about the job, about who you're working with. I mean, if you don't like the people you're working for, obviously that's the same as any other job anywhere in any field.
But it's annoying when they're constantly surprising themselves by the need for overtime that was not planned.
Right. But when they keep like coming to work with their pants half on and tripping all the time, it's like, guys, get it together. Some of the hardest stuff I've ever had in my life was a job where everyone was a pro. It was good shows. It was a real company. It's just that it was an hour commute both ways.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like a 10-hour, 11-hour a day kind of place where it's like, we kind of want you to be here. And all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, you do the math. It's a hour commute followed by an 11-hour day followed by an hour commute. That is the same thing as just not having a life. And if you're not sort of psyched up for that being your new reality for a little while,
Yeah.
you will wake up a few weeks into it and realize that what you really want to do is quit this and go learn carpentry.
Yeah.
And sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
I mean, have you ever ended up in a situation where you were like, okay, I need to stop for like months? Because that's one of the things I see a lot in the patterns that my friends end up in.
Right.
Is that sometimes, I mean, first of all, I gather it has been told to me that adult humans sort of save their money sometimes so they are able to control more of their lives. I just gather that's a thing that humans do generally. So that's one of the things.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll be like, I've got insert number of like tens of thousands of dollars saved up from my crazy job 6 months ago. Maybe I'm going to not work for 2 months and just like become a person again.
Right.
You know, go back into the soup for a little bit and nutrient myself and come back out like, all right. Sorry, I had to just go out and not do this for a while.
It definitely depends on the kind of person you are.
Have you ever been like, all right, done for a while?
Oh yeah. Oh sure. Yeah. I mean, and
Not burned out, but like smoked.
Oh.
Like started smoldering like, eh.
Yeah, it's more the burnout thing. And because I don't know, I guess I have enough of an attitude where even if I go through a really rough experience and everything, it's still, I don't know, you can still bounce back. And after you have that recovery period, then it's like, okay, all right, let's try this again. And hopefully this time, this next place won't be like crazy on fire. The world is falling apart as soon as I, plug into it. But yeah, I mean, after pretty much every time I work like a crazy shit ton of hours on a weekly basis with no weekends and that sort of thing, as soon as I'm out of there, I'm like, listen, I'm doing nothing for at least 2 weeks. And that's where I get into trouble with my agents, because it's like they're ready to keep me booked all the time.
Right.
Like, oh no, we'll have you going in someplace on Monday, after you're done on a Friday. And I'm like, okay, I need
2 weeks.
I need a break, like, because I am barely alive. I haven't done laundry in a month and a half, and that sort of thing. But and the commute too. And this won't really apply to newcomers coming into this, but now we're just getting into where I'm at in my life right now as a little anecdote of where visual effects can lead, which is, all this. One thing to expect if you're going to look at doing visual effects in the Southern California region, that's going to be in Culver City, Santa Monica, that kind of thing. Down there in this sort of you're not up in the valley usually. It's down here in sort of the these downtown
most of the
beach
bigger
cities
companies are
area.
down there.
Yeah, exactly. And so
there are a lot of places in the valley and everywhere, but like a lot of the heavy hitters are all sort of in the same zone.
Yeah.
Down LAX-ish.
Yeah, exactly.
As opposed to the valley.
So for my money, and this means nothing to people who don't live here, but I'm up in the valley, which is above the 101 there in the Van Nuys area.
Me too.
And so most of my work down there entails an hour commute, and it's an hour of a very elaborately crafted plan to avoid traffic on the 405 and go this way and that, and Waze is your friend and all these things. And so the hour down there and then the slightly less back because it's 8:00 p.m.
Right.
Is
you go to work at the same time as everyone else in the city. You come back home later.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it takes all your time, especially so it's like you got an hour there, you got a 10-hour day, and most of an hour back. That's half of a day,
right?
And that does not include sleeping,
right?
So and then if I'm trying to I'm in a phase of my life here where I'm actually trying to work out, and that takes an hour and a half. It's like you're pretty much just going to bed when all that's done.
Yeah,
that's about it. And it's tricky too, because my wife and I, we're renting a house right now, and we really want to buy. We'd like to not be flushing money down the rental toilet here, but it's so expensive in this area that to be at the kind of house that we'd like to be in, where it's affordable, you just keep getting farther away from where all this work is, which makes the commute even longer. And it's like, oh, boy, this sounds very asinine and pedestrian, like, oh, geez, yeah, okay, whatever, Mr. Los Angeles, whoever. But, like, this is a serious career situation that pertains to visual effects.
It's your life.
Yeah. And now
you can formally predict a big part of your life.
Yeah.
And that's how it goes.
And that's a part of it.
That's
a real kind of what I'm facing. And so there's always the option where you kind of go, okay, well, I could probably get real friendly with one of these places up in the valley, like Encore in Burbank was a great place to be at. I'm sure I could settle in right there and just go for it, and then be in a more reasonable commute to somewhere and that kind of stuff. But that doesn't necessarily allow me to continue pursuing the freelance ambitions that I have and going from different places and hopefully working on more bigger tentpole sort feature film work and stuff like that. You got to be mobile for that. You got to be able to get down into those areas and do all that kind of stuff. And so it's a very annoying situation to be in. And I don't know that applies to places other than here, but that's one thing I'll just throw out there as the reality of it.
One of the new, like, revolutionary new thought technologies that I've been enjoying for the last now 3 or 4 years is I've spent a lot of time in the last 3 or 4 years telecommuting. And it used to be
let's talk about that.
Time was that the way that worked was you would get a hard drive full of plates. And it'd be movies or TV shows where they plan in advance, more like the Showtime-y, HBO-ish stuff where it's like, we have some time on this. And maybe you have a weekly meeting with someone, you get a hard drive full of plates, you come back home, you work on it, you send QuickTimes sort of deal. And that's sort of how it used to work. These days, I never thought it would come, but it has, that I am just a laptop connected to my at-home internet, and I'm using basically a virtual compositing software. Like, I'm using a virtual desktop that is being telephoned in, and my mouse is mine, but what's on screen is the monitor of a virtual computer that has the company's software, and I never leave the virtual network sort of thing. All those plates aren't getting transferred to my computer and then back or anything like that.
Right.
I am just sort of like patching in to the extent
to a workstation elsewhere. That's on the network with all
yeah,
this
and
stuff.
it's not even a real workstation. It's not even like I'm remotely moving the mouse around. It's like it's a virtual computer with a virtual operating system on it. Right. Looks like Windows, is Windows, except it's like just happening in a metaphor on a hard drive somewhere. And it works fine, and there is no lag, and it's great, and that is awesome. Because if for no other reason, it does give you the ability to get the time of your life back that would be spent commuting. And I'm in a lucky enough position that I'm working on real stuff when I'm doing this. It just happens to not be at a studio. And while that is kind of an odd constellation of job attributes to find, I love it. And it just suits my lifestyle. My lifestyle is more, I want to spend as many hours in the day doing something completely weird and random and like not a part of my visual effects life at all as possible. And like music or making synthesizers or just juggling, doing weird stuff. And the more time I can spend doing that with no pants on, the better. So that I don't have to put on pants every day, drive for an hour, work, come back home, also wearing pants, and then take them off and start juggling. Like it takes like 9 steps out of it right there. And it's become a thing that you can actually do on real work. Like time was, again, that you get a lot of Craigslist stuff and all that. That's all, you're doing it on your home computer. It's all, it's not.
But you're working for a company.
You work, yeah. And the time was,
in this
it was
situation.
like, you do like a random project for this. It was a Craigslist job. It's on your computer. You send them the thing, whatever. But it was never like, you are working on a show with a name that's on bus ads.
Right.
Now that's not the case. Now I'm working on, and one of the reasons why this has to be done in a virtual network thing isn't just to solve the fairly meaningful problem of these are, EXR plates or they're DPX plates. It's 32 megs a frame and it's a 900 frame shot. We're not going to upload this onto a server. That is a thing. That is a problem. And this does get around that. The bigger thing is if we're giving you that plate and presumably a QuickTime reference for what the shot is and what the sequence is, you're just going home and we're hoping that you don't put it on BitTorrent. Mm-hmm. Now, no one worth one piece of salt would ever do anything like that because they would immediately lose their job and never get one again, except that makes signing NDAs and stuff harder. That makes it trickier for the company to trust that it's like, wait a second, you gave that guy what?
Right.
And it's like, oh, plates and a QuickTime with a whole third reel. Mm-hmm. What? Are you serious? Whereas if it stays on the virtual network the whole time,
it's behind layers of protection.
A distinction has been drawn.
Yeah.
And of course, any tech-oriented person will go, you can screen capture it. Shh,
right.
Don't tell them. They don't know that yet, apparently. Mm-hmm. But it puts one level of like,
sure,
what's the word I'm looking for? Whatever. It gets it one level distant from something they're uncomfortable with, and it moves it back into the realm of, the plates are never leaving your company. It's like, nope, the plates are never leaving the company.
It's always a little bit honor system because there's in the most secure place that's been Marvel audited, and everything. It's like there's nothing to stop you from you could pull out your phone and take a picture of the screen. Like that's the bottom line.
Yeah, the reality of this is we're not humans and hamster balls. Like at the end of the day, any one of these artists is probably capable of putting like a thumb drive in a machine and walking out with something one time they could really ruin something. And the reason that doesn't happen is because everyone is paranoid that anyone would ever think they would ever do anything like that. Because we all know that is so off the charts the wrong thing to do that you wouldn't get hired again if anyone knew you'd ever done it once. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's like the reason people are like the companies are worried about it. Totally legitimate reason to be worried about it. But also the unspoken agreement with everyone, and actually it is spoken, in fact it's signed often, agreement with everyone, is that you will not disclose, like, here's the cut for the season finale of the show, 5 months before the first episode airs.
Well, obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, NDAs are a big part of your life, which is fun. Like whenever you come on to a new show, they'll give you a little piece of paper that says, I will not do any of the things we were just talking about on punishment of death in perpetuity in all universes.
Yeah.
And you don't. Except for that one time. No, just kidding.
They're getting pretty good. They're getting real secure. I've done a number of places that have worked on Disney projects or Marvel projects, and they've got a whole protocol for that, so that everything's, the machines that you're working on cannot go on the internet and stuff.
Yeah,
and so even
they're air gapped.
Even the shot tracking, the actual it's called Shotgun. You should probably look into it. Is a piece of software that is more and more becoming the typical way of actually tracking progress and having notes and seeing versions, and the real,
think of it as like VFX Excel. It's like it's a database program for what shots are out there, who's working on them, where they are,
asset
what
tracking.
version.
Yeah, exactly.
And
that being on a completely different system, which is very annoying in its own way, but that's how serious it is about that stuff. Thumb drives wouldn't work, and all
they have
that
a
kind of stuff.
proprietary shot tracking system.
Yeah,
that's fun.
But so that's happening more and more, which is interesting. On the topic of working remotely and stuff, it's interesting, and tying into sort of tangential little offshoots of visual effects. So working on Star Wars, there's a little team of us. Most of the time that I spent at the Bad Robot offices in Santa Monica was under the leadership of Mr. Andrew Kramer here.
From videocopilot.net?
Videocopilot.net.
I've heard of that guy.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. We had corresponded in the past and chatted on Twitter and things like that. We were aware of each other and all that kind of stuff. But I got in there completely for other independent reasons, just getting hired like pretty much a normal person, and got in there and did some this and that work. I'm not going to really get into any details for fear of those NDAs we were just talking about, but I think it's all right to say that I worked on Team Kramer, which doing graphics and holograms and stuff like that. So we had some real fun sequences that I'm sure you remember if you saw the movie. That we worked on, and so as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of a graphic design component to that stuff. And so one of the other artists that was brought on pretty early with Mr. Kramer was by the name of Jace Hansen, and I bring him up specifically. Look him up. He's got lots. He's done tons of amazing work, but. He has sort of specialized himself into a very interesting little corner of visual effects, which is number one, graphic design specifically, which is really sort of an interesting art unto itself, especially with all the big movies that we have these days. Your Iron Man, kind of stuff, and all. I mean, pretty much there's no big movie that, especially sci-fi, that doesn't choose to go and do its own, wacky HUD graphics or computer console displays and all that kind of stuff. And so Jace is sort of a veteran of that. But the interesting part of his story is that he lives in not Los Angeles. He lives in Las Vegas and does most of his work from a real high-speed T1 connection, and manages to perpetually, from the sound of it, get a lot of work doing this kind of stuff on even sensitive projects. Which I guess is just sort of after a while doing it and being trustworthy and a relied upon asset, I guess, maybe you're extended a little bit more freedom at it. But real talented guy. And so it's really just funny because his whole setup is, he's working from home in Vegas, doing his thing, which is super awesome. And then occasionally he gets a big project that's like worth going out for, and he'll just go, all right, cool, I'm going to go work on this and live in a hotel nearby and just do that for the months that it takes and then come back. And I thought that was completely nuts at the beginning, but by the time we were sitting there spending most of our waking hours together, I'm like, I can see how this works. I am envious of you going to your local hotel, whereas I still have a 40-minute drive at the end of my night where I'm leaving in the middle of the night, And so that's a really he's an interesting point of context for me as far as what can be done telecommuting these days. It's a brave new world, man. Yeah,
and I like it.
And motion graphics, especially in general, is sort of an interesting sort of side angle that could be absolutely pursued directly and specifically, not necessarily as opposed to the rest of visual effects, but it's its own thing. It's its own little world.
You can make that your whole life,
yeah,
if you wanted to.
And you've done a little of
I've
that.
done a little bit of motion graphics stuff. It's I've done, for about 2 years, I was the graphics supervisor at a production company, so I was doing things like lower thirds, title. Like if you picture, think of like the logo of Survivor coming on screen, things like that. I did a lot of. I did a lot of lower thirds where it's like someone's name is on the bottom of the screen and all that stuff. Right. And that is all work that is largely done in After Effects, except, insert expressions and everything here. But once you've kind of got those skills, a lot of adjacent jobs suddenly start opening up, which is interesting. And I ended up doing a lot of trailer titles. And that is like, it used to be that Don LaFontaine would say "In a World," but now it's a title card that says "In a World."
Right.
Those titles are done by people who do visual effects, usually, for a lot of people, or for a lot of trailers. There are trailer title companies, there are ad companies, and there are even like in-house trailer people for most of the big places. But most of the like trailers for a movie where maybe this isn't just one of the 30 giant movies we're releasing this summer, is just a company somewhere that made a trailer. They just cut it together. They need titles in it. And that ends up being just some artist. And it's one of those things where I found one person who kept kind of hiring me back for random stuff. And now I've done like 30 trailers. And that's another side of the thing. And then the last sort of really super MoGraphy part of it is more things like what I'm working on now on a movie that's coming out called The Circle, which is the like sliding elements, cool interfacey looking stuff. Like if you think of the interface stuff you see in something like Tron, or even sometimes things that look like Matrix code, but often it's more one of the VFX-y examples of that kind of MoGraph would be like when you see like a text message that someone gets in a movie and it shows up on screen, it's 3D tracked. A lot of that kind of stuff. But also things like, for instance, there's a whole bunch of things in the world these days that have screens. Oftentimes VFX artists will be asked, maybe you've noticed, oftentimes VFX artists will be asked to replace the contents of that screen with a thing that someone else made where it's like, that was a blank monitor on the set. We want you to put this thing on there. Someone had to make that thing that goes on the screen.
Yep.
Generally as a separate process from someone having to put that on the screen and track it and get the comp working. I've been Mr. That guy for both sides of that kind of a lot now. And oftentimes it's a thing where like, what we really need is just to show that it's this person, they got caught, that's their mugshot or whatever, but all they have is a picture of that that actor that they took like right before they went home for the day. It's like, front shot, side shot. Right. And it's like, cool, can we have that be like on the screen where it's like, cool, we caught this person, that's their mugshot. And you go, yeah, do you want me to like have it be their mugshots in Gmail or something? Like, no, like the software where it'd be like the criminal justice, the JIS software that they would really have. And you're like, I don't have that software. So do you want me to like just make it up wholesale? And the answer is usually after a whole bunch of negotiation, yeah, please. So getting to do that kind of stuff, it does fall within a spectrum of there are more and less creative liberty-ish ways of solving that problem. Ideally, you want to do it in some manner where it's a real thing that you've done a good job of emulating. But oftentimes it's like, can you make this look like a real thing with absolutely no information at all? Yep. That's one of the things that ends up happening a lot. And it's all After Effects-y stuff, but it ends up being a lot more about the design process, about how you, again, expressions are a big part of this. And this is also a thing that happens. I know expressions are a part of Nuke and most other graphics packages. I only know how to do expression stuff in After Effects. But it does open up a world of possibilities to you, and it makes everything, you get to do a lot of crazy stuff.
And you may have to relearn some language translating that to other applications, but the principles of what you're trying to do
Once
are
you've
the
learned how to
same.
do programming in the graphics world, that's an incredibly powerful thing. If you're someone who's always kind of side-eyed expressions like, one day maybe. Well, first of all, in After Effects, there is a distinction between expressions and scripting. Scripting is a little harder. It is more like just programming something in C, I guess. But expressions are mostly kind of a cutesy little language that you can pick up real easy. Take a course. It's worth learning them.
At least in a very simple form, and then you can get tricky later as you go.
Yeah.
But, hey, you figure out that wiggle expression. You're going to use that forever.
All the time. And the MoGraph stuff, it's interesting, the weird side jobs, because I'm used to the world of, like, for instance, bidding and knowing what things cost in VFX terms, as part of a larger VFX industry. But then when you sort of take a step off the reservation and go into like trailer title mode or whatever, all of a sudden the numbers are different. Or like maybe, I'm used to working 40 hours on a shot easy if it's a big shot over the course of like days of work, whereas the entire trailer could be done in 2 hours. So how do you bid? Because it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to charge, insert 2 hours of pay for that trailer? It's like, that's what you would do in VFX. Yeah. But over there, they'll think that you're not legitimate if you do that. They'll be like, why is it so cheap? We're used to, like, the graphics for a trailer we usually bid at like insert number here, but it's 5 figures.
Right.
And it's like, right. Okay. At which point things are a little bit different. Also, you end up in situations like that with I've done like poster art a little bit and other things where feeling out how much things cost is one of the big question marks about all of these fields. I guess it's easier when you're an editor once you get past a certain point because there's an editors union. You get in, it's like here's what it costs, here's what here's what your day rate is from now on,
right,
on a union show, et cetera, et cetera. And there isn't anything like that for VFX or any of this other stuff that I'm doing. There are like guilds and stuff, and you have agencies, but at the end of the day, I've always found it a little uncomfortable to figure out what the price thing is,
right? Because
it's the sort of thing where it isn't clear. Like, these are all problems that we solved years ago for the garment industry. We figured out what someone should get paid to sit and make a shirt all day long. But when you're in a situation where everyone is an artist and they're doing subjective work at a high level, it's hard to know what you're worth and what the person next to you is worth. And it's hard to talk about sometimes. Ultimately, you get over it. But,
and you and the person next to you may be doing the same job at different rates.
Right. And like the whole mess of like the just general conversation about women get paid 77 cents on the dollar thing, it's like that in VFX for everyone, where it's like that person gets paid $2 on the dollar and that person gets paid 45 cents on the dollar. And the only difference between anything about any of them is that they asked. And then someone said yes and the other guy didn't ask or whatever. Like, it's just it's a huge scatter plot of what people are getting paid. And it's always kind of a shady thing. And I don't really have any guidance for you on that front. That's just part of it. Eventually you'll figure it out. What's going to happen is you're going to ask for a number and then they're going to say no. But that
should happen at some point.
That number will keep moving.
Yeah.
Like when you start, see, this is the thing. Like where do you even go with this conversation? It's so a case-by-case basis for every artist and every show that there aren't even really rules of thumb until you get to a certain point, at which point you can say, look, I'm not going to work for anything less than this, period. And that number will reveal itself and slowly float up the longer you're in the industry.
And it's easier to get assertive about that after you've got some experience under your belt and you know what someone was quite happy to pay you for in the past. Yeah. You kind of have to work your way up through that. I mean, because the best you can do otherwise is really just be sensitive to the whole situation. I mean,
the whole second side of that is like, well, this is my friend's project and it's a big thing, but he's a friend, but what are we doing?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's
friend
just
rates and stuff.
Yeah, it always gets iffy. There's also situations where there aren't answers to that. It's not like you're a member of a team. It's that you're the only person and they need you to do this entire thing. Like when you're supervising, does the number change in your head, or is it more a thing where it's like what my job is and how stressful it is and what you're paying me to deal with every day changes, and that changes the number, sort of thing?
Yeah.
I mean, you've done a little bit of supervising.
Specifically. Well, it depends what you mean, because we should be clear in distinguishing that supervising could mean that you might be, for example, and we didn't explicitly lay this out, but what I do is compositing, which is really just, putting everything together in the sort of generally thought of as being 2D environment, although that's, really changing.
Combining images.
Yeah, putting it all together for the final result, whereas, Teague is a little more specialized into the 3D side of things, although he of course, composites as well. For example, what I was going to say is, I've been in the position of being a compositing supervisor, which means that, you are kind of responsible for maybe a small team and sort of handling something in the post-production process like an artist, but more sort of overseeing and helping to, probably devise some of the approaches and solutions, or just generally just trying to handle the details of getting something done if it's not that crazy. And that's distinct from an on-set supervisor, where you'd have a visual effects supervisor who is actually going out and interacting in the production,
talking to the director. Hey guys, they need more tracking markers.
Exactly. So if you're doing green
Solving
screen,
problems.
you're the guy running out there and putting the things up that you're going to need later to track it, or that your team will be, or what have you. And that can be a lot more of the sort of, devising solutions and how should we approach this and how should we handle it kind of thing. And that entails a different skill set of being able to be sort of, savvy to how sets work, and when you're, overstepping your bounds, or what's appropriate. You got to have a certain level of tact and ability to interact sensibly with other folks on set to be able to get that stuff done. So there are two sort of different things there, and they both of them entail more responsibility. That's the key distinction from simply just being an artist. And on set is probably, I would say, even more so, because you're really going to be making decisions that are then what you're stuck with in post. After that, it's whatever you did is what everybody has to work with. And hopefully, by the time you're doing supervising, you've been an artist, and so you know what the ramifications of these decisions are. If you're like, oh man, we got to go, we got to get the shot in the can, we can't put an extra light on that green screen.
Right.
It's going to be a dark one. That's going to be a tough key.
Yeah,
well, you know what that means, to you. Do you know what that's going to actually be later on down the line? So I've lost sight of what your initial question was.
The whole point was just talking about how when you end up in different situations, the number will never be clear even when you have the same job all the time. And then also different jobs cost different amounts. And what you want, not only what you deserve, but like what you want for one thing is different from what you want from another. This will vary based on every single criteria, but also like when you're doing something like supervising, that's a different job almost. I mean, you are also a visual effects professional,
right?
In every conceivable way, it's the same thing, except it's a totally different job.
Yeah. And I've come into it in kind of a funny sideways way, which is that there have been a couple projects that I've been the supervisor on. In an on-set capacity, and both of these projects are ones that are kind of more like that, your buddy and Craigslist sort of scenario, where it's very professionally executed production and everything,
but it's fundamentally, hey, you want to do this?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, hey, what do you think? How should we do this? And in both of these situations, I'm the one left to actually have to execute it after it's all said and done. So, my decisions, supervising are the stuff that I'm going to have to live with, which is cool. That's actually less pressure to me, because I'm not sticking other people with work that could have been better if I screwed it up,
Yeah.
So I will be cleaning up my own messes if I make any. Unfortunately, I haven't,
stepped
done too bad.
Yeah.
But it does come down to your ability to gauge, the work that you're creating for yourself and stuff like that. And in a certain sense, making your own rate. And so on these projects, what it's really been is, cause it's effectively been that friend rate thing. It's like, these are projects that, by all accounts probably should have a team and more support, but I'm just fortunately able to handle this kind of stuff myself and be able to pull it off and pull together through, folks I know and favors and stuff, getting done what needs to get done. And so the only way that I've really approached that is sort of like, well, what does it have to, what does my rate have to be more enticing than general artist on a box work that I could be doing? In other words, I have other options. I could be going on and working on the next Star Trek right now, like that, and that would pay this amount, and this is the experience that would be. So it needs to be pretty much what I would expect that to be, and then hopefully a bit more, because I'm taking on more responsibility and all that kind of stuff. And so that's generally how I've shaken it out so far. But that's probably going to be an answer that will be different in a few years if I'm doing more supervising in other more established contexts. I'm sure that'll be a different answer.
And then I guess the sort of third part in the triangle of weird question marks and payment stuff was, do you want to talk at all about your situation where you ended up not getting paid on a job afterwards?
Yeah, we can do that.
That's crazy. Like one of the things that happens a lot in VFX is a common conversation in VFX is how bad it is in VFX. When you're in it, it's a conversation that comes up a lot where it's like, we should have this, we should have that. I can't believe we don't have this, justice, etc. And for the most part, I think that's totally legitimate and all true. And incidentally, I happen to have never actually seen anything like firsthand where, wow, that was a really bad, like that's exactly the kind of thing you hear a horror story about. I've never encountered one. I've had a few times where I didn't get paid overtime the right way, and you could say every dollar's made of dimes, but also like it's not as dire. It doesn't feel as dire as often it gets talked about in terms of the superlatives.
Right.
So how real is that, et cetera? Like how bad is the industry really? I've never actually stepped into that much. And then Ryan had this one crazy anecdote where I was like, oh, there it is. That's the kind of stuff you hear about. All right.
And really, if you kind of have your finger on the pulse of it a little bit, you've probably heard about, these big studios closing down. It's like every couple years, it's like some giant tent pole, VFX house is just shutters their doors. And it's like, whoa, they worked on like all these gigantic movies that are like enormous successes. How could they possibly? And the answer is, of course, that, and now this is just a general VFX industry kind of thing, but it's like the whole model of visual effects as a business that provides the service of putting visual effects on your movie,
right?
Is that it's a constant race to the bottom as they compete with each other for the work. So you've got a big movie that's got X amount of visual effects that they need to get done, and you've got these studios who are going, okay, we can do it for this, and then
we can operate at a loss, so we can keep the lights on right now,
exactly,
or we can bid what it's actually going to cost to do that, and they'll go to someone else.
Yeah. And so they're often just sort of competing and just razor thin margins on this stuff. And your bigger places like ILM are a little more like, okay, we kind of get our pick, and so we do what we need to do, and that's how they stay competitive and strong and alive. But you hear about it all the time. Other places that just, it's like people are not getting paid, right, and then they go bankrupt, and then it's over.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know anyone who had that sort of experience or anything.
I knew people on Twitter and stuff that had that situation,
right,
but
exactly.
It's not something where I had ever seen it sort of first or second hand.
Yeah. And so the place, which went unmentioned and will continue to, that I mentioned before, that was kind of like, it's a pretty small group, and we've really just got to get it done ourselves here. This is how the only way we're pushing through is us here linking arms together and making this happen. Pushing through and all these really late nights and everything. And at a certain point,
it is up to us to finish it.
Yeah, exactly.
They need us for this to happen.
Yeah. And so after a certain amount of time, I began to notice that my paychecks weren't on time. And I look back and I'm like, wait, when was my last one? And of course, it's crazy. It's right. Like the fact that I looked at my account and noticed this was, something I should have been doing more often, of course. But I mean, in the flurry of all the work that's going on, it's understandable how it could happen. And so, yeah, after a while, it was kind of like, it's been several weeks now and we are late. And so that became an issue, which, of course, I was fortunate enough to be able to have my agency go directly to the owner of the company and say, hey, what's going on? There's a personal relationship there. So it's,
right,
a thing. But yeah, and it was, of course, the like, nobody's got hostile intentions. They never do. It's more like, okay, we got some clients. They're late in their payments to us and everything. And it's the sort of situation where, and it is not enviable. Like occasionally I kick around the idea in my head of starting a little effects company, but it's
I can have my own little shop. And you can,
but
right,
all the stuff you have to worry about and the overheads and the costs associated with operating these things, you've got a couple. If you only have a small handful of clients and a couple of them are late, you're in a tough spot, right, where it's like you got to pay the rent on the office space. You got to all these other factors that I'm not even as an artist aware of.
You're saying it's not like you don't have sympathy for their situation.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But then
yeah. So the unfortunate conclusion of that is as time dragged on and they continued to be unable to fulfill those payments, it became a real situation. And so as soon as we sort of concluded the immediate work that we were doing on this opening episode to a show, basically the first moment where I wouldn't be completely fucking over everybody by leaving, I had to get out of there, and that was was understood by everyone, but unfortunately it is now months later after that, and I am still owed a car, the price of a car, a modest, there
it is,
Yeah, and so, the next, what do you do about it? And right, it's of course, we've been after him for quite a while, and it's become a whole thing, and we sent him to collections, and we may be going even a little more serious about that, but, unfortunately, it happens, and I did not see that coming. And so unfortunately, that stuff is a reality in this industry, and it can happen. And unfortunately, there's a good chance I'm not going to be seeing any of that money, because there's also a not insignificant chance that they're getting through the commitments that they've made, and then the company doesn't appear to have the infrastructure to continue, and will probably close its doors once that is concluded. And then at that point, there will be no chance. So we'll see what happens. It happens.
It's weird, and it just happens. And there's what gets me about it is how there, on paper, is recourse. There is like things that you could do next, and the secondary reality just happens to be, all right, go ahead, we'll wait, we'll see what happens.
Right.
And it's like, at the end of the day, one thing or another is going to happen, but this is the real situation, and it's not like you can just shake it harder for the money to come out of it. It's like, all right, well,
yeah,
welcome to the new reality.
Or at least I hope. I mean, it's because it's frustrating at the same time. It's no small sum of money that is owed to me, but in the grand scheme of a business operating at this level, it should be, I can't, so it can't be completely understanding about it here, as you can imagine.
Does that change anything about the way you want to work in the future? I mean, does that
that's a good question. I mean, is there anything you could do differently to try to prevent? I mean, I guess just always pay attention every time every check is coming, I guess. But and I guess that's really it, as just keeping an eye on those things, and as soon as any stuff like that starts to present itself, to talk to who you have to sort of get the story on it, and not wait out. Actually,
I mean, you were kind of going like, and I would have done the exact same thing. You go like, all right, well, I get it, but come on, let's get paid. And like, there was the grace period after it was too late, where it's like, all right, well, it's too late now, so come on, guys, I get it, but come on, give me the check. And so that adds to the number of weeks to it. It's not just like, on the first day after it's been 2 weeks since that payment. It's not like that first day. It's like, I am not coming into work today. It's like, guys, what the hell? Come on, get it together. I'm here. Let's go this, but please give me my check. There's like, it becomes a thing where you're lucky that there was the sort of break in the logical flow of things that this particular episode is ending.
Exactly.
If you didn't have that break and it was just like a movie or something, it's like, at what point do you say, I don't want to burn a bridge ever just on principle, but also I'm not coming into work tomorrow.
Sure.
Because this is insane.
And the real threshold on that was loyalty to the other people who I was working with.
Yeah, just
because knowing that, again, it was the situation of like, we are the ones who have to get this done, and me just leaving would totally screw the whole thing. And I wasn't looking to screw anybody else at that level. And so I was, like you said, it's fortunate that there was a break like that where I could go, oh, okay, and I'm out of here. Because if it was just a perpetually ongoing thing, then I would have been like, listen, guys, it's one more week. That's it. Like, I would have given a bit of a heads up as it happened. I waited until I had something else lined up, and then just told them that day, this will be my last day, and there's nothing that they're going to be able to do about it.
And were they like, no, don't, bye?
It was pretty understood. And of course, I told the folks who I was working most immediately with, who it matters to on the person to person level, as opposed to more of the sort of, bureaucratic
that's
level.
Another one of the things that I don't know if we've hit it all the way yet, which is just the idea of being such an individual in so many of these situations, and yet also the idea of being a team player. Mm-hmm. And having some weird trade-off that's never quite all the way stated between what your obligation is to this group of people.
Yeah.
Because they are all also humans that have lives, and they don't want to be here all the time. And if you were to just throw them under the bus, they are the ones who will be picking up the slack. It's not like there are people in the wings waiting to come and rush in and like, there's not an understudy for you on this team. But also in a situation where it's like, how long are you going to stick with it if the conditions are a certain way? The team player question is, I've never run into it at anywhere near that level. We framed this by saying that is a worse anecdote that I've heard firsthand than any other I've ever heard.
Oh yeah, it's a horror story.
But I mean, you can totally see how it would happen too. That's just scary because you do want to be a good person. You do want to be a good artist. You do want to, I'm thinking now in terms of your coworkers, not the hierarchy. Mm-hmm. Is when you want to go home, but no one else is going to do this shot.
Right.
And
it's tough.
Yeah. And your immediate supervisor, who you have respect for, I'm inventing a new situation, who you have respect for, is going to be thrown under the bus by the fact that they weren't able to come through on a thing they said they'd be able to come through on because you didn't finish it.
Right.
And in that situation, what do? Because you like that supervisor, you want them to hire you again. Mm-hmm. It's not like they ask you to do things out of the ordinary all the time, but also if you don't do the thing out of the ordinary right now, it will change how they feel about hiring you in the future. And there's this weird, like, everyone's kind of, pardon this is crude, everyone's got each other's nuts in their hands at all times. It's like one of those like Mexican standoffs in a movie where everyone has a gun on everyone else.
Right.
Where it's like, all right, we're all in this together. Nobody move. All right, we're all just gonna, and almost every single time it works.
Except when it's like the end of Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's just like, okay, well, all right, let's go. I've never been in a situation that's like, my only horror stories are like, we had to get a lot of work done in very little time, sort of horror stories.
Yeah.
And those are all over the place. Yeah, looking at the list of stuff we wanted to talk about, we've hit a lot of the main stuff. And the only stuff that's sort of left over are sort of more tangential, like talking about different aspects of it. We've talked about 3D, we've talked about MoGraph, we've talked about 2D. What about stereo conversion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've never actually done, I know how it works. I've worked on some 3D stuff, but I've never actually done the actual like stereo D conversion joint.
Right.
Which I know a lot of people who do that from time to time. It's part of their like usual sort of series of spinning plates.
Yeah, it was interesting. Again, back at Encore in Burbank, in the offices above the level that I was at was Stereo D, which is sort of the...
When you have a movie that you shot normally, and then later you want it to be made into 3D, so some company gets together and starts doing that thing where they make it slightly different for each eye, manually by hand for every frame. They're the company that does that. They're one of the companies that does that.
You might
that is called stereo conversion.
Yes, exactly. And Stereo D is sort of probably the top, most well-known...
It's a big player.
Yeah, exactly. You might be wondering when you go to these 3D movies, oh, how do they do that? Oh, it's exactly what you think. They cut out every single thing in the movie.
This is great. Remember the ILM thing where I'm like, you wonder, like, they must have special tools that make that so that because the first thing you think of for how you would do it, you go, no, there's no way to do that. There must be a special way to do it. This is the exact example of a thing where it's like, no, exactly the thing you first thought, and then you immediately threw it out with like, that's too hard. That's how it's done.
Yeah, exactly.
Trace the whole movie.
And so everything gets cut out, which, as you imagine, is an enormous undertaking that you throw an army at. You know, it's hundreds of people just going nonstop.
Totally.
And the joke that I think I'll attribute it to my buddy Seth. He said it's the ass end of visual. It's the visual effects of visual effects, which is that it's
the tail end of the tail end.
And where it really is poignant is something, you're working on a project that has visual effects. Those 3D the 3D conversion can only happen once that visual effects shot is done, and so, or done enough, I guess. And so you've got them waiting on the visual effects, which is almost the last thing. Oh, we're really pushing the deadline here. And then it goes to 3D to get stereo converted.
Yeah.
And they can, luckily, things can be provided from the compositing process that help that. Maybe you've done roto for other reasons already, or you've got passes from 3D that you can use.
Actor was on a green screen in the first place, so we could give them to you as a separate matte shape.
But still, they have this whole process that they go through after you're done with all your work. And so it's getting squeezed. It's squeezed on both ends. Exactly. And so that is, again, not an enviable job. However, worth noting here because, you're talking about a lot of the same basic skill sets that you learn, in your prep or junior stages, which is rotoscoping, and boy, that's the place to learn rotoscoping if you had to, is Stereo D, man. I mean, any of these places that do a lot of extensive stereo conversion, because they really have figured out like how to streamline that and make it as quick and easy as possible, because it's just day in, day out bread and butter work on that side of things. So, and that's another specialty, like we were talking about motion graphics, that stereo conversion is a whole little world that you can get into and have a career ladder going up to, supervising and directing how those things are done, because there is a whole craft to it. There's a lot of, artistry involved in just trying to dimensionalize a lot of these things. And they do a lot of, they do more compositing type work than you might imagine to sort of, extract things out and get them to work for each eye. So there's a lot of overlap in the skill sets there, and that's definitely a place that you can pursue specifically.
I've never done that. I would. It's also, this is it's
a little thankless, but
it is thankless. Although to a certain extent, if you were thinking in terms of your career as a series of movies, that is one way to end up working on a lot of movies that are all like major frontier movies.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, top tier, not frontier. Frontier is where cowboys are.
Well, yeah, you could be. Hey, I'm breaking into doing stereo conversion. You're on the next Avengers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
like our friend Mike worked on like Harry Potter, and he worked on the Avengers and a couple other things that were like, whoa, when did you work on that? It's like, I did stereo on it. It's like, cool. Because, at the end of the day, you're looking at your IMDb going, those are some movies I recognize.
Yeah.
At a certain point, I wonder, there must be a number. We'll call it the Teague ratio. I'm claiming it. Dibs. The Teague ratio is how impressive your IMDb is. The ratio between like, here's 15 things on your IMDb that I've never heard of versus like the one thing where it's like, that's the Matrix Revolutions. It's like, whoa, cool. You worked on that. It's like, I've worked on 4 things and you've heard of all 4 of them. Must be equivalent to like, that's 700 things. That's like, I don't know any of those things. Like there must be like a trade-off, and we're going to call it Teague ratio.
Right.
Yeah, maximize your Teague ratio.
If you take the star meter from IMDb and mix it with the Rotten Tomatoes score, then you can really find the exchange rate on these projects.
Teague ratio. You're just squeezing the blood out of that stone. Yeah. Well, okay.
Oh, man.
Now, and the other thing that was still sort of a leftover topic, and we do have to kind of like wrap this up talking about what it means to like going to work and be professional and like the actual day-to-day life of being an effects artist.
Sure.
But one of the last things that was sort of a holdout is talking about software and evolving your tool set.
We can get a little more specific here.
Yeah, I started Mr. Photoshop, and Photoshop is still the software I've used longest in my life. I've now used it for more than half of my life, well over half of my life actually. But also After Effects is my oldest school one after Photoshop, and then also Premiere, Lightwave, and then Buju is my 3D tracking of choice, but that's just because I'm an old guy now. And a handful of other post things. Whereas you are...
I'm the opposite of Teague in that I will do tasks that should, by all rights, be done in Photoshop in After Effects. I do graphic design, layouts.
Right.
I've done book covers and posters and anything.
I've gotten to the point where...
Everything.
There's a lot of things about After Effects, the way After Effects works, that makes so much more sense than how Photoshop works for Photoshop tasks.
Right.
Smart Objects kind of alleviated that a little bit, but still, After Effects is... it makes a lot of sense for some sort of photocomp. Not all of it, but some of it. I get it. It's fine.
Yeah.
And then... in addition
and that's just
to that,
an amusing quirk of me.
But you are all Mr. After Effects all the time guy, and then a couple of years ago you started picking up Nuke.
Right, yeah.
So do you... the cursory difference between these two software packages, for someone who doesn't know anything about this at all, which why are you still listening, is that After Effects is more of the old school layer-based sort of...
There's a stigma to it.
Yeah, the old canvas metaphor where you start with the background, you put something on top of it, something on top of that, and then you can do adjustments for the entire thing accordingly. And that's how a lot of audio is mixed. That's the same with master tracks and stuff. The old layer paradigm, and then it got sort of thrown for a loop a while back with Shake. Actually, I guess I don't even know how far back this goes. But the idea of nodes being a slightly different metaphor for organizing your imaging thoughts. And they're sort of different at the kernel level.
Yeah, and I can give an overview of that if necessary. So when we say node based, what we're talking about is Shake, which we keep referencing, was a like what they were doing Lord of the Rings in. So it was being used for big, heavy hitting projects and everything. And
it was the quote unquote serious, real software.
Yeah, definitely
was.
Yeah, and in not necessarily in the same way that they had, custom designed hardware boxes that you would set up in a bay and have your client who's working on your commercial come in over your shoulder while you do real time, changes on stuff. It's different from that. It was more about just being deep, fully capable. So nodes is really more like, and I'm sure if you Google it, you can, screenshots from Nuke or Shake or things like that. The way it works is it's more of a visually laid out sort of system where everything that's ever done is an operation, and then that can feed into future operations. And so, for example, the first node that you would have in Nuke is a read node, and all that does is simply go, okay, where am I getting this material to start from? And
where's the shot?
File path, and
what
are the
folder?
frames in it? What frame is it going to start on? How should I I be interpreting this in terms of color space, things like that. And then it's like, okay, I'm going to flip this upside down and render it. So then you would add a transform node, wherein you would invert it either, on your one axis, or you'd rotate it 180 degrees, and then you'd have a right node. And then that right node would be, you'd put in where that thing's going to go and what kind of format you want it to be and all that kind of stuff. And of course, that explodes all out into, you can have nodes that are cameras and scenes and 3D work that's being done. You can have retiming nodes that are doing all sorts of, temporal effects like, time warp and things like that in After Effects. And, titles, text, everything. But color grading nodes, of course, and then merge is really how you start putting things together. So without going into a tutorial on that, just to have that laid out as in contrast to like layer-based models like After Effects. This is the bottom,
this is the middle, this goes on top.
Yeah, where you're just stacking things like transparency papers and having different blend modes for how they operate, as opposed to merging two different things together, and plugins. And so then they're run as operations that are applied to each layer, and you have masking, of course, in After Effects and all that kind of stuff. So it's just a different way, and you might be going, okay, so what? This is a different shaped steering wheel in a car. You're still just driving it, right? And to a certain extent, yeah. To a certain extent, yes, that it's true. And all the good news is, if you start in After Effects, which is infinitely more affordable / acquirable. No, I'm just kidding. But if you start in After Effects, which is a much more plausible place to be starting as you're getting into visual effects yourself,
right.
You'll be wondering, am I just throwing all this away when I go to start learning Nuke or something like that? And the answer, of course, is no. And those techniques and the way that you approach the work that you're doing and how you're going to solve the problem of an effect shot is the same strategy that you'll use later. You have to learn different tools to do it. And what is nice is then, obviously, the more different types of tools that you have available to you, the more options you have in how to execute that plan. And so, the stigma of After Effects being like, oh, well, you can't really do big,
eventually you'll grow up and learn Nuke.
Yeah, exactly. Pat on the head with the propeller beanie. After Effects, is much more capable than people generally suppose. And I've done tons of work in After Effects. Not everything. Most of I'll say television on my IMDb is pretty much all After Effects. And then getting into Nuke, more into, feature film stuff. But After Effects is quite capable, and you can really go very far with it. You could easily have a career doing visual effects in television and feature films. And all you know is After Effects, and you could comfortably set up your house there. Yeah, it's fine. And I know people who are there and doing quite well and doing lots of work and stuff. Nuke is interesting. It's a bit more technical in its way, but in that way, it's also kind of more straightforward once you kind of get your head around it. Because After Effects is sort of, it's putting a lot of nice stuff under the hood and keeping it out of your way, so it's simple and easy and quick to work with. Whereas Nuke is a little more sort of out and exposed, and you have to sort of, the classical example of that is dealing with alpha, where After Effects is sort of like, it's transparent. That means it's clear. You know what that means. That works great.
Right.
Whereas Nuke is a little more kind of like, well, there is no such thing as transparent. You have 4 channels, one of them being alpha, which is dictating your transparency. But if you just have an alpha channel and an RGB, and you go, boom, let's put it over this, it's not going to do what you expect it to do, because you actually have to pre-multiply your color and then it's like, okay, all right. So you got to get your head around all that kind of stuff, and there are a lot of nuances into technically how it works. But the nice part about it is that it is more powerful in a lot of ways in how it handles things. And without getting into all that and trying to make the arguments, pros and cons of the two, I'll just say that I find for when you start getting into bigger, heavier comps with a lot of work that you're doing, not only does it handle it well and in ways that are nice technically, but also the arrangement of how you're interacting with this big tree of information is, I find, much more intuitive and clear and easy to find where things are happening or where you're having problems, where you're getting slowed down. It's easier to just look at it and navigate your way to what you need to get to. Whereas After Effects, you can just get buried in layers and layers,
a wormhole of pre-comps
that all just look the same, and you kind of have to, navigate your way around and go, okay, this is it, And
because you cannot see the steps each pre-comp is taking to get there, unless you use the schematic view, which is pretty much what nodes look like.
Yeah, more or less.
Kind of.
But it's more of a Thomas guide to your comp that
Nice.
you're doing. It's not really interactive in the same way that a node tree is.
What software should I learn, Ryan? What software should I learn? Answer the question.
Yeah, After Effects is a great place to start, and you'll learn a lot of technique that way, and it gets you going pretty fast. But if you are facing that situation of I'm going to pick up something brand new, and you have the ability to get Nuke is not cheap. Nuke is not cheap.
Really?
No. It's I mean your typical Nuke.
I haven't gotten it yet. So one time in my life I will learn Nuke. I haven't done it yet. I haven't gone into the price part yet.
Yeah, your
thousands.
Your basic Nuke is about $4,000.
Whoa!
And Nuke X, which is with additional functionality that is generally considered necessary, is more up in your $8,000-$9,000.
Wow!
And that is not a one-time fee. That is, there's also a license fee that is annual. That is, I think, $1,500 on top of that. So it is
They're not kidding.
No, they're not kidding around, and they've got excellent protection on the way that the licenses work. It's very robustly. It works so well that even when you have licenses, it doesn't always work correctly.
Point being, you're not going to pirate Nuke.
Yeah, no,
it's not going to. Your plan to go. Shit. All right, I'll figure out another way. Will fail.
And so it's really predicated on the idea that this is being professionally used in a place where there are budgets, or you're an artist where you're getting paid enough to be able to afford stuff like that. And so that immediately prices it out of a lot of starting.
Totally.
Which is why I'm saying After Effects is a great place to start. If you, for some reason, have the ability to get Nuke and learn it that way, that's cool. Now, there's also the personal learning edition of Nuke, which is free and pretty much fully functional, except for something like God, I don't remember what it is, but it's like you can't like write out or something. You can't like render, or you can't like save your projects, and they're not compatible with the full versions and things like that. And so, so they actually do have a very generously
capable trial version,
which you can absolutely learn your chops on. Especially, you get your FX PhD thing going, and you get your PLE version of Nuke, and you're off and running to the point where now you can approach a studio and say, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Like you can get to that level.
Meaningful trade-off. That does work for me. Yeah, that's a trade-off. That's expensive.
It is.
That's serious stuff.
Yeah. So
I've always wondered how people learn Flame. It's one of those things where it's like, it's like you have to. Yoda has to ask you first. It's like you have to be invited. You have to wear a white suit. Mm-hmm. They teach you Flame in a weird room with no dust in it at all. It's creepy.
So the last component of the answer to that question is really like, well, okay, ultimately, Ryan, what are you telling me? Like, you're saying I could have a whole career in After Effects and do anything I would maybe want to do. Is that true? Okay, well, as you start getting higher up into the types of projects that you're doing, you start to enter a realm where Nuke is.
Do you want to work on I'm trying to think of analogies, and the only stuff that comes to mind is pretty disparaging. But it's like, do you want to be a mechanic, or do you want to work on Formula One cars? Like at a certain point, that's where if you want to keep getting better at working on cars and keep working on cooler cars, the tools and the setting is going to change. At some point, there is going to be a crossover that happens. Mm-hmm. But also, like, mechanics work on real shit all the time. It's not like F1 mechanics are the ones who are fixing all those Lamborghinis you don't ever see in real life.
Right.
Like there's a mechanic somewhere who's fixing that car. There's real stuff out there.
Yeah.
If you're a mechanic who doesn't know how to use one of those cool power things.
So it's not so much about what you can or can't do, but if you're sitting there looking at the visual effects world and going, boy, wouldn't it be cool to work on this or that? Most of the things you're kind of hoping that you could work on are things that are being done in Nuke, and that's pretty much where I can leave it as far as that goes.
Yep, that's actually kind of...
I'm enjoying it, though. I think Nuke is great. And I had a really difficult learning curve going into it, just being so embedded in After Effects and going, oh my God, I don't know where things are. This is uncomfortable. I don't know. Like, having to learn the translation of methodologies and tools and functionality was annoying, but now that I've sort of got my head around it and everything, there's a lot to like about Nuke, especially in a production environment where you may have to be, handing stuff around between different people. It's a lot easier to open up somebody's Nuke project and figure out what's going on.
That is a problem with
After Effects, and it's easy to send stuff around because everything is, the code, the actual script for Nuke is a text file that's human readable. You can go in there and actually see, you can read this node is doing this and these are what its settings are and things like that. And so it's quite easy to, you can select an arrangement or a constellation of nodes in Nuke, literally copy it, paste it into an email and send it to somebody. They can copy it and paste it in, and those nodes will appear.
that's a neat trick.
So things like that, like it's really
White rabbit object.
It's oriented very well for production environments and being able to work fast and play musical chairs with stuff, which does come up a lot.
That is one of the things we were talking. I was going to say, there's two. I have two tangents. Okay. All of what you just said about Nuke kind of applies to Maya. In terms of like industry standard, in terms of
for sure.
Like for real, there are any tool, any artist, et cetera, but also no, for real though, Maya. Like I'm a Lightwave artist. I learned Lightwave at the Dave School because everyone there was a Lightwave artist and their dads were Lightwave artists, and somewhere Ellis Island is a part of this.
Would you say Lightwave is the After Effects of 3D?
Yeah, Lightwave and Cinema 4D and 3ds Max are all kind of competing. Are all kind of competing for being After Effects to Maya's Nuke, I guess. Yeah. And then there's, I mean, Lightwave is one of many 3D packages that you can get that all largely do pretty similar things. And where one starts to peel away from the others is kind of at a higher level. Same thing with Nuke, where it's like you can do some real, all the way super serious guys work with all three of those 3D packages I just said. In fact, if you wanted to, you could probably do the same kind of work. And it's just a matter of like how the processing is set up and how well it'll eventually achieve it with any of those pieces of software. It's just that at a certain point, the sort of clarity and the build quality of Maya in some meaningful way for how you can stack new scripts onto it, how you can build out a proprietary system for just like you're this or you're that, this production company's this movie's that. It's just a more robust tool in some way that's one of those, it's kind of always hard to describe unless you're in it. And then once you're there, it's Plato's The Cave. You can't ever explain what it is about Nuke or Maya that's exactly better for someone who's not using it right now. It's just you get there and you're like, you got to trust me. Lightwave is excellent and I love it. And I am given to believe that once I learn Maya, something about my life will get better. They'll release my family. I've been told that if I learn Nuke one of these days, I'll get to see my family again. And it's just never made more clear than that. But Maya, there is a lot of like an analog, a parallel happening between the whole Nuke conversation next to other compositing software and with Maya, which is that it's, you know, this big like Elysium that's floating over the rest of us sort of thing.
It is definitely the industry standard. I would say.
Super duper.
I mean, so the same question directed in the 3D realm. I'm a kid. I'm a beginner. What should I learn?
Learn Maya. Now the thing is, I mean, Maya. If you learn Maya, I don't know. I would have said this about Final Cut, but you learn right. Maya, you got a job. You're fine. Like if you learn it for real, if you get good at it, that's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
It is. It is. It would be crass to talk in terms of like winners and losers, but it seems like the grass is pretty green in Maya's town. If you're just starting from nowhere, there's no reason not to start there. That said, I encounter Lightwave work enough. This is not as true as it was 10 years ago. But I encounter enough Lightwave work that I find that I can use it and get paid on a fairly regular basis. A couple of caveats. One is that often I'm like the only 3D artist on it, and we just need a thing, and I know 3D, and the fact that it's Lightwave never interacts with the project in any other way, so it doesn't matter what I was using. If I was using Maya, that would be fine. If I was
they just wanted renders out of you.
If I was using Blender and I could get the look I needed, then that would have been fine because they only interact with it as an asset. They don't care about the actual pipeline. That's one caveat. A number of times that I've used Lightwave in a professional setting, that has been why. Secondly, bear in mind, Lightwave was a widely used early adopted piece of software, and it got an ass load of use earlier on in history. Like it was a major piece of software for all the Firefly stuff, all the Battlestar Galactica stuff. I mean, it's right. And Babylon 5. I mean, really huge stuff, big project. And it's just that like later something about, it's weird how Stigma just sort of smells for a while and then eventually, maybe I haven't checked in on it recently, but it just seems like the Lightwave thing is sort of not on the same trajectory that Maya's on. In some weird, meaningful way. So if you're going to learn one of them, I would say learn Maya. There is also the thing that what you're doing in Maya or Lightwave or Cinema 4D or 3ds Max or insert 5th through 25th programs that all do nominally the same thing is that those are all kind of your old school, like they aren't for sculpting so much. And there are like side programs for things like sculpting, like there's ZBrush and Mudbox and things like that, which if you're going to learn 3D because you want to be designing like orc faces and stuff, maybe don't learn Maya. Maybe in that case, learn like ZBrush. But generally speaking, Maya's a safe bet. Nuke's a safe bet. And After Effects is fine. And I probably wouldn't recommend that you learn Lightwave unless you were just a hobbyist, in which case Lightwave's very easy to learn, and that has that going for it because it's set up in a way that makes a lot of sense for me. And every time I look at Maya, I have a little like panic attack, but whatever. But it's all super real. Now, the other tangent, and I had two places I could go from, you're talking about passing around a nuke file, and it's like, I can look at this and make sense of your crazy thought experiment that didn't pan out at all, and now I have to finish the shot for you. Which is that 3 or 4 years ago now, I started adopting these like hyper rigorous workflows for every time I open an After Effects comp. I always do the same layout of folders, same solids. I no longer make new solid. I start with the same 5 solids that are all labeled there, and you can just duplicate them and rename them as layers. But that way, when you open my project, it's not like, what are these 500 layers and nulls and stuff. It's like, this is all laid out in a sensible way.
Right.
And every single time, whether or not you happen to know, like you might open one of my comps for the first time and not get it, but you open my second through 5,000th comp, and every single one of them is exactly the same comp in terms of layout, in terms of the thought process, in terms of how rigorously ordered everything I can possibly make sensible has been made sensible.
Right.
And that kind of goes into this larger, it's not professionalism because it's professional to do good work. That is like a second order thing where it's like someone might have to open this. Yeah. And it's like it's like this extra level of, it would be called courtesy if anyone else was ever going to check you on it. It's just having your ducks in a row, basically. Yeah. It's just getting doing things when you have the ability to do them right. Then it's like, all right, beyond that, what can you do to be a better artist or a more useful team member? And at that point, it's like, well, once you've already passed the threshold for the work is good, something like being predictable is important. Being reliable and accountable is important. Now I'm looking at a thing on my board here that says professionalism, just to talk about that in general, which is where I'm going. But like being predictable is a big deal, especially because I find a lot of the time artists like us make perfect sense to ourselves. And then you look at anyone else's workflow and you go, oh my God, what happened? What happened here? Yeah. You like start trying to put bandages on things like, this could never, it's holding
so many solo layers.
Right. There's 450 pre-renders and none of them are in here. Right. That it becomes worth whatever amount of time you might even nominally lose investing in making it make sense to do that because of what you'll gain the one time it matters. And I found that at this point, once you've decided how you're going to do something every single time, you don't even spend any time on it. In fact, I have a script. I made myself a script that does that. But things like that. Is there anything that comes to mind for you in terms of once you got your ducks in a row, once you're an artist, once you're coming into work every day, what kind of artists you like working with?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things you talked about earlier was communication and just being,
absolutely.
Being not transparent, but being readable.
I mean, and
being someone that someone else can rely on for a plan.
And in addition to echoing you on this sort of being, organized and clear in the work that you're doing, which is a huge thing. And I've been, on many situations where that work does get passed around. Somebody else has to crack it open after you're done and do something in there, or, you guys going to take it now, or, we have to replicate this a bunch of times. Something you did, we're going to make that into, we're going to do that a bunch of times. So turns out you were the TD. Surprise. Yeah, exactly. I got hit with the, hey, you're going to be look deving this thing on your first day. So, okay. All right. Here's Supergirl's laser vision. Boom.
Also, you lightning, Mr. Heroes.
Oh, yes. Well, that wasn't first day at Stargate or anything, but like, I'm just saying being thrown into the...
Sure. Like the first thing you did ends up being like canonized.
Right, exactly. And so like, boy, how important was it that I was laid out and organized?
Yeah, boy, I'm sure glad that I put my pants on for that comp.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they get in there, it's like they've got names. They're not like final, second, final, third comp, pre... Question marks, parentheses?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Nuke is not, again, another...
And then with Nuke, I get that, when you look at it, you see a roadmap. You can see how the process
It's all laid out. There are big colored boxes around certain clusters of stuff that's happening with giant text on it saying what it is and what's happening to it and things like that. And so that's good. In addition to that, as just a human being, working with other human beings in an office environment, that's kind of, what I was getting into was, you've got to have... There are a number of things, and this ties into a few, and I'll try to just hit what I can as swiftly as I can. But just being a well-natured person that's easy to be around goes a long way. And so, working with other people and just having a positive attitude about it. Now, that sounds like just totally bankrupt advice, but like, it's the sort of thing where it's like if every time somebody wants to come and talk to you about something, you got your headphones on and then you're like, oh, hold on, and then you got to try, and then you're like, yeah, and you seem like you're being imposed upon every time. That's not stuff that's going to keep you around.
Yes, you totally have the right to your own space.
Yeah.
Also, come on, you're a person.
Yeah, be
here with us, please.
Be present.
Right.
And yeah, and so there's that. So
not saying don't wear headphones, just always be happy to see people.
Exactly. Yeah, I got headphones on all the time. Lately, I have it in just one ear, so I look, sort of half 1 foot in, But
or people think that you're back in time and you're just trying to do it right again.
With one ear?
Oh, that's a Primer joke.
No,
if you saw Primer, maybe you thought that was. If you saw Primer, you didn't think it was funny. Whatever. We can never know. We're on this side of history. Moving on.
So, anyway, yeah. So in terms of also working with people,
just being a mensch.
With the stuff that you're doing, I want to just say that learning to not personalize stuff is a big asset.
Wait, what are you saying, man? You think you're better than me?
Well, I didn't want to say it.
Yeah.
No. But so you're working on your shot, and it's like, okay, you're doing what I don't have a good example off the top of my head. You're doing a shot, and there's more than one way that it can be done.
You gotta put a blood splatter on this guy who just got shot.
Sure.
And you're trying to track it on there.
Sure, perfect. So you got it's all technically set up. You got a nice little track going. You're putting your blood on there. Things are going good. You think it looks nice. You've spent half a day on it and everything, and you show it to somebody, and they're like, oh man, this is way off. Like, you gotta get rid of that, do something else. You really can't. You will drain yourself way too fast if you internalize all that and take it personally. And so, I learned by working with some personalities that are rather
precious,
abrasive,
sure,
just sort of. Really, I don't want to say it's tactless necessarily, but certainly not a lot of regard for you and your feelings.
Sure.
And learning not to take that personally, because it never was. It's the kind of thing where it's like you kind of just go, okay. And what I found is that after you get over the part where I just spent, X many hours working on this, getting it the way that I want it to be, and having other forces come in and go, no, do it like this. You have that beat where you go, I think mine's better because this is how I chose to do it.
Right.
As soon as you can start pushing that aside and going, okay, fine. Number one, because you have to.
Sure.
Number two, because you'll discover, and it took me a little while to go that those other inputs that you may not be excited about are valuable and useful, and as the quicker that you can start going, okay, fine, I can't tell you how many times it's like I get a note that I go, I disagree with this note. This sucks. I don't want to have to be doing this. You go through it, you do it, you get the work done, and you look at the render and you go, well, son of a bitch. It's like that's, I don't know. It's at least not worse, and maybe I can admit is better. And then let months go by and look back at it again, and you go, no, I'm glad I did that.
Yeah, and worst case scenario, even if you don't like it months later, you can go, never would have thought of that though.
Yeah, it's starting
like that's in your mind now. It's like right now you're still kind of in ownership of your own validity mode, like trying to protect the work that you already did.
Yeah,
and maybe you got some mama bear thing going on. Learn to lose that instinct, but that makes sense. But also, at least now, the next time you have a new shot, and there's no longer like a chain of provenance for all the thoughts you had for how you should pull it off, and you're in like a new fresh start mode. Now you have two ideas for how you could start this project instead of one, and more solutions never hurt.
And look at it this way too. It's like you at home on your own would have done it one way, but the other people that are around you that your work has to go through this process, that's actually an asset if you start to choose to allow it to be, because all these other sort of variables coming in and notes and different ways that you wouldn't have thought to do it, and then having to do it that way can be educational, and you'll start to pick up a lot through that. And like one of the other sort of insights that I came across is that a lot of the time when you're doing work and you're approaching a shot and you're saying, well, the quickest way from A to B is this. This is how I can do it, and I can do it in the least amount of work. Cool, good. But that extra effort that is optional usually has a benefit to it in some way that helps it all work better. And I'm being super vague here. It's sort of on purpose, I guess. But it seems like there come a lot of opportunities where additional work that's not strictly speaking necessary is what turns a shot from okay to make or break awesome.
Cool, that one works.
And that's often the kinds of differences that you are afforded when you have the time frames of feature film work as opposed to television, for example. That's where they can go in and do all those extra little things.
Yeah. There's a fun story. You know, Sandy Calora. I heard an anecdote from him that I'd never heard before. He's a like badass creature designer and just artist and just guy in general. He worked on a million things, and you should. Sandy's the best. But he had a great anecdote. He was working. I forget the studio that he was working at, but he had been making, and I forget the specifics of why. I'm sorry that I'm missing the sort of the setup parts. But what he was doing was he was making I want to say Dick Van Dyke bust from scratch. So it's like wire mesh. Throw on the clay, start sculpting with your thumbs, and then like it's your job today to make that look like Dick Van Dyke. Go, sort of thing. And this is when he's a younger artist. This is a point about a lesson he learned early on. He was a younger artist, good, talented, but also, not as experienced with the best way to be about your own work. And what ends up happening is he has it that day. Like particularly that day, something went right, wind blew the right way, and he nailed it. Like that, it's creepy. It is no longer in like, oh, good sculpture mode. And it is in the first thing you think is that's Dick Van Dyke. And the second thing you think is it's sculpture mode. He's super proud of it. And everyone in the art and everyone in the studio is sort of like, wow, all right, man, that really came together. Pat on the ass. Like, this is really good. The guy that owns the company comes out. And of course, Sandy's swelling with pride. He's like, yes, you knew you could do it. You were right. You could do it. You did it. Way to go, man. And the guy who owns the company comes over. Sandy's like feeling super confident, like, all right, one's in the bag. Don't look like an idiot today. This is one day. Chalk it up for old me. And the guy's like, that's great. That's really good. And he puts his hands on Dick Van Dyke's face and he smushes it. And he says, never fall in love with it. Now make it again. And Sandy was heartbroken because, dude, how is it possible that you just did that, Miyagi Yoda? Like, what the hell was that all about?
But and his name was James Cameron.
Right. But a critical thing that just happened was he realized the thing was, if anyone had a note on that, I never would have been able to implement the note. I would not have been able to ever touch it because I was so pleased with the job I had done. I would be completely stratified in the choices that I'd already made.
Right.
And when that guy did that, for one thing, yes, I did want to murder him. Secondarily, I was able to make it again. I would have been able to make a change to it. And if I was in the mindset of, this is done, and it is invalid for you to have an opinion about something that can be different.
Right.
I would have been a different artist every single day since then, and look where I would be. And that one moment of, everyone gets one of those weird Crucible Yoda moments where it's like someone has the balls to just throw that amount of shade directly in your eyes. You can benefit from the lesson, and in his case, it was just don't fall in love with it.
Yeah.
And I kind of that rung heavy with me. Where I was like,
that's a good one.
I get it. I got the message there. That's cool.
Totally.
And I do, by the way, I struggle with that still. I always remind myself of it. Like having these little heuristics and the old metaphors and Boulder at the Mountain and stuff, having all these like little thought technologies for how you can encapsulate a thing is great and better than the alternative, and still doesn't always sort of insulate me from having those feelings in the first place. You just sort of like throw those old cliches at yourself and go, I'm okay. This is fine. I get it. I'm a professional. This is fine. You do feel that way, but the idea for being cool when criticism happens and not seeming like you're constantly at risk of wanting to leave here and bomb a hospital has an effect on the team vibe.
Yeah.
Just be cool.
And absolutely, one of the most professional things you can do is just be that guy who just, number one, start to prepare to steel yourself to, against initial reactions that happen when you got your preview up on your screen and somebody comes by and they're going to tell you about it. Just go ahead, take a moment to not be like,
right, count to five. Count to five in your head. Don't just count to five.
Just take it in and then sit there and think about it and kind of, roll with them if you can.
They were just talking about pixels. Right, they weren't talking about you.
Right, exactly.
They're just talking about pixels.
Yeah. The difference between we're working on solving a problem that's this shot,
right,
is not you as a character, So that's a big part of it. And that'll take you a long way, just being receptive to feedback in the right way is a huge part of it. And it really opens a lot of doors to you, opening the scope of your own ability and sensibilities. So
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
The only other stuff here that we didn't really hit, we were talking about software and the recommendation, like if you were going to make a software recommendation in a vacuum, Maya for 3D, Nuke for 2D. What about tracking?
Yeah.
Because I do a lot of tracking in my job at this point. When I'm doing 2D stuff, it's usually some weird script thingy that I made myself, but it's utilizing Mocha a lot.
Yep.
I'll use the After Effects tracker for my weird hacks, but when I'm doing 3D stuff, I'm doing it in Buju, which I don't know if they're still making Buju. I haven't heard anything about Buju in years.
No,
it's just the one I learned years ago, and it still works.
Yeah, I think
these days I hear about PF Track, PF Match It, Synthize, these kind of things. Do you use any of those?
Yeah, I learned Buju at Stargate and used it for many years. I think it got bought by Autodesk or something like that.
Oh,
so it's still around, I believe, and doing its thing. Although I've been
that was one of the first like prototypical a seat of this software cost $10,000 kind of software.
Right.
I was like, oh my god.
Yeah.
How much did they pay Nedry to do all the things in Jurassic Park? Good God.
Yeah.
$10,000 for one seat of software.
So 3D wise, I am a big fan of Synthize. My buddy Seth sort of got me into it, and I just find it a much more enjoyable experience than Buju, for example.
A lot of work in tracking, by the way. If you get good at tracking, that's a job.
Absolutely. Yeah. Match moves are a big deal, and you've. Like, if your company's got like the one awesome tracking guy, it's like they are.
You might get fired. They're not getting fired.
Yeah, exactly. So that's another great little corner to specialize into, and it's interestingly rewarding in its own way. Like when you get a good track and everything's like sitting there, you're like, yeah. Well, I don't know. There's a certain satisfaction.
Totally. No, I totally agree, because it's one of the things. It's one of the
few binary.
Super. Yeah. Exactly.
things.
Yeah. It's one of the things I was thinking of. One of the things about prep work. One of the things that makes it distinctly harder sometimes is that with prep work specifically, as opposed to any comp, anything else, Harry Potter goo coming out of the wand or green screen work or all those things, with prep work, on paper, there should be no version 2. You aren't done with it. Version 1 isn't something you can look at until it's unassailably exactly right, because that's the point.
Right.
Like there shouldn't be. Like,
it's like, is the wire removed or is it not done
Do you
yet?
think this is ready? It's like, it is or it isn't. And that's one of the things about tracking is I changed philosophies about tracking maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Prior to that, it was like tracking is, oh my God, don't hurt me. And I'm going to do my best and and like I'm at the, like you feel like you're in a dinghy out in the sea. Like, okay, tracking, I'm going through. Oh God.
Right.
All right, it's stuck. It's fine. Just get to shore. Whereas now I'm like, I don't accept wiggling at all. Like, the standard has shifted from just any port in the storm, man, to a professional track is not going to jiggle at all. So if you want to live up to that standard, the answer is, is it tracked yet or not?
And holy shit, you don't want to have done this and done all your work and then later get a note back that your track's not good, because you've already built all of this work on top of that track.
Yeah.
And you have to be pretty crafty about like revising a track without having to change everything else on top of it. It never works.
One of the tricks that I came up with that is in terms of like always setting up a comp the same way is that I've set myself up with a tracking solution where if there are notes on my track, it is built to be revised underneath itself, which is good. It's hard to explain, but it's the sort of thing that you can add. Every new keyframe you add only adds accuracy. So you can always get more accuracy out of it if you need to. But that's a trick for a different conversation.
Yeah.
It's fun. Generally speaking, there's no revising a track. God help you if you're trying to revise a track, because you will fix the part that bumped, and that like the end of the shot is off by 20 pixels or something. It's weird.
Yeah, it's tough. So I'm a fan of Synthize. I find it very approachable and sort of more interactive and very fast.
I got to get on that. That sounds.
PF Track I've also heard is like super awesome, but the real indispensable tool at this stage to me is Mocha as well, and that fortunately comes with modern After Effects. So if you get on board there, then you are already in a good place. But Mocha is just sort of the indispensable tool for getting your rock solid tracking, and it's what it's really all about is planar tracking. And so as opposed to After Effects or the simple tracker in Nuke or anything else, I would imagine. It's looking for a detailed high contrast feature that you stick a point on, and it tries to match that across frames and tracks that feature. But of course can get tricky when that shape changes over time or lighting conditions change, and it can kick the tracker off, and you got to be careful. But at the end of the day, you're just getting a two-dimensional, where is it in the X and where is it on the Y, and it's as good as you hope it to be. Mocha is more about grabbing whole areas of texture and tracking that move. So if you think about like a brick wall and your camera's moving around and going around the side of a building or something, and so it's not looking at individual points. It's trying to map a whole region and how it's moving over time. And it can look at that in different ways, simply position or position and rotation or with skew or with perspective. And so those are different level depending on what you're doing. You don't want to like ask it to be like, yeah, figure out the perspective on this thing that's, perfectly static almost anyway. Like you're inviting more variables to happen. But anyway, I'm getting too technical. The point is that it's Mocha is great because in grabbing these bigger regions of texture and tracking it, it's almost like averaging a bunch of little 2D points. And so you end up generally with something that's really stable and solid and doing exactly what it ought to be doing, unless something goes wrong. And that of course happens, and you have to solve for it. But even for simple 2D tasks, like if you want to be sure that thing is working, say you got to track something out of focus in the background with no distinct sharp corners or features, that's difficult for a 2D tracker. You got to make a really big region for it to try to lock onto, and it'll be slow. Yeah. But that's what Mocha is made for, and it's really good at it. And it's very easy to get into After Effects or Nuke from a Mocha track.
If you are an After Effects user and you haven't really done the Mocha thing yet, just learn it. It's a half hour to the point where you're like 75% there with Mocha. A lot of what Mocha is excellent at is the thing its algorithm does, and you fix it when you need to. But you can get on board with Mocha, and it will be a huge boon to you to learn.
And I don't reach for Mocha for roto tasks, but I know a lot of people who do, because it can use all that underlying power, that tracking engine, to predictively help track your roto that you're doing. So if you've got somebody walking sideways on a treadmill and you track on their head and that head's not turning much, it's probably going to do a pretty good job of following that head and get your roto 90% there with one keyframe. Then you go in and just clean it up, and so that can be a big time saver. So that's another useful bit. So you got your Mocha, you got your 3D trackers we talked about. We've talked about compositors. Was there anything else that we were getting into? I was recommending, if you're looking at going into a production environment, I mean, I don't know about how Shotgun works in terms of something that you can even try to do at home, but I guess I'm just saying, get ready to, at your first place, don't assume that's the only place that's going to use it. Go ahead and start trying to get familiar and comfortable with it.
Yeah, Shotgun is, I've seen Shotgun a few times, and other stuff is just stuff that's mimicking Shotgun. Yeah. What about like render farm now? So that's something that you probably wouldn't have done at home. Interacting with a render farm is a big part of your life at a studio. I've worked at smaller companies where it's like, just get BG renderer.
I've worked at I worked at a number of places that are using something called Deadline. And
I've used Deadline. Yeah.
That's a render manager. Also, Smedge is the other one.
Butterfly was what I used back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so these are all things that are really, you submit your work and it's going off to be rendered by other machines. And so this is a way of tracking and seeing what machines are available, what jobs they're working on, what the progress is, if they had errors, what those are, which is obviously important to figure out.
To a larger extent than almost anything else. Like maybe your shot sheet, whatever your program is, that's managing all your stuff, and your render farm software, to a greater extent than other stuff, that you could walk into the studio that you've just started at and go, hey, how does this part work? And that's fine that you don't know how that works.
They'll let you know what you need to know.
Generally speaking, like when you start at a company that's bigger than 15 or so people anyway, they'll have like someone who's already made this as like a PDF. They print it out, they hand it to you. Or it's like, here's how the thing works. Don't break it. Yeah. Generally speaking, at a place that's bigger than even that, it will have been scripted in such a way that you can't break the farm.
It's proprietary at that point.
They figured out ways where it's like it only gets accepted onto the farm if it won't break, sort of thing, which is good, because without that, surely one of the first things you'll do on day one is break the farm. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And that's the kind of thing that you can ask about. Is there anything else that we should wrap this up by saying, things where if you find yourself in over your head, what the answer tends to be. I mean, what you should do in that situation is ask someone.
Yes.
And just give up on the idea that you're going to do a perfect job when you first start. In fact, embrace the junior artist status if they'll give it to you. But ask, be nice, don't be a dick. Generally speaking, I would say my first year working out here, 2007, I'm trying to think of the mistakes I made, the things I would do differently than I did that year. I was too blasé. I had guessed that the way it works is that we're no longer squeamish about the conversation about money and getting fired and all that. I assume that was how it works, but I kind of took on too much of a super cash, man, it's fine sort of vibe. Largely as self-defense, just because I didn't know that I was right. So I was just like, I'm going to do it like this and seem confident. It's like the trick with billiards I have found is just hit the ball really hard. Because if it doesn't go in the hole, at least it's like, well, that guy's not worried about the table. Like he's like, he's here, he's playing. That's all. Then whereas if it's like, if it goes in, you look badass. You hit it hard and went straight in. It's like, boom, look at this guy. I was hitting the ball hard every time back in the day.
Right.
And not letting in the ability to seem like I didn't know what I was doing. I was really worried about everyone seeing through the fact that I was terrified. And newsflash, they could totally tell that I was terrified. So it's like that wasn't even working. And secondarily, I was more of a dick than I had to be in most of those situations where it's like, I know I'm not really coming up with examples here, but my vibe was the biggest problem, which was wanting to convey a sense that I knew what I was doing and it was fine. And I've done this before when that wasn't true. And I only say it's okay at that level because it does happen a lot with idiots getting into the job, and it happens in every field, I'm sure, but it's actually not okay. So like that's one of the things that you will shed is that shit. Ultimately, it is better to know the answers than to not know the answers, but it is worse to pretend like you know the answers.
Right.
You're only as good as the thing you said you could do, but it turns out you actually can't. And now we're, up a tree because you said you could do this thing, and now here we are, and you were lying. And that is worse than in the first place just being like, I don't know how to do that. I think I think I have an idea of how to do that, but I should point out.
I'll piggyback onto that, which is that one of the best things that you can be in, especially in your early years, as you're sort of picking up this stuff and learning techniques and things, is to be confident but humble.
Yeah.
And really not be afraid to, reach out to people and ask questions and stuff and have dialogues with your coworkers and your supervisors. And hopefully everybody's cool and in a generous spirit. Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the best things about Stargate Studios and one of the reasons that I stayed there for as long as I did is because, especially in my early years, it was a very open place where it was very easy to just go, I've got this shot. I know how I'd do it.
Right.
But I will take the 5 minutes to go over to Mr. Senior Artist over here and be like, hey, man, I got this. Hey, can I show you something for 5 minutes? And then just sort of get their opinion on how they would approach it or what they might do that you might not, or go, oh, I'm a little worried about this. And then go, it'll probably be fine if you such and such and such. And, they just might say something that you weren't thinking about. And, opening it up and just being your job is not just to get done whatever's right in front of you, but like you should be thinking about how to soak in all the other techniques and opportunities that you have around you with other folks. And so sort of being that closed off, because it's real easy to kind of shut down and just be like, I'm just here doing my work. I punch in, I punch out. That's a thing to do. But the more you can just sort of be having a good time with folks and, kind of don't be that like annoyingly chatty guy or girl or whatever, but
read the room, but
yeah, exactly. But
don't be an island.
Yeah. Don't be an island. And, again, it's everything is an opportunity to learn more or learn a different way of doing things and stuff like that. And so that's something that, it can take some guts in the same way that networking takes guts. It's hard to kind of go up to somebody cold and, get them to weigh in on something or invite somebody's opinion. It's a lot easier when you have a render. So you're doing something and you're like, just grab people, doesn't matter who, and just be like, what do you think of this?
Right.
Even though you're fine with it, maybe it's done. But you're just like, hey, just in soliciting other opinions is an interesting way of starting a dialogue where they're coming to you with the like, oh, you're interested in what I think. That's a great conversation starter.
Totally, yeah. Flatters. I mean, it's not only will that flatter people, generally speaking, the answer is they will have something to say about it. Like whenever someone gives you a piece of advice or a note, or like they think you're shot, I'm talking now in a situation where like there's someone who's nominally above you, sort of either they're directly your supervisor or more established than you are. When they have a note on your shot, they know what they would do with your shot to get approval.
Yeah.
And they're trying to tell you their theory there. And whether or not their theory happens to be right, it's like the Louis C.K. thing. It's like they know more. Like even if they're wrong, their wrongness is rooted in more information than you have. It's the point of it is you will feel confident when you know all the ways this thing can go. So learn all the ways this thing can go.
Right.
Like don't become an expert at the one way you know how to do it, because the one day that it doesn't work, if you put all your chips on that one color. I like to mix metaphors, Ryan. Somewhere
between overly cocky and pretending like you know shit you don't, and the oh my god, I don't know what to do. What do you? Right. Please tell me what to do. I don't know. Is something where there's a good opportunity to keep growing as an artist in there, in addition to just getting work done, and that's something that I recommend for, especially the early years.
Yeah, man.
Growing up in these things.
This thing has to end at some point.
It does.
And I don't think there's this is the sort of thing where it could be a 40-hour thing, or it could have been 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I feel like the email's long enough at this point.
Yeah. Hopefully it's all been informative and beneficial to at least somebody.
And if not, hey, it's like a 4-hour thing you got to listen to. That's half of your day figured out programming-wise.
It was free.
It was free, man. Free is a good price. What was your best day ever in visual effects?
Oh, my God.
Or at least a solidly good day.
Man.
Like, for me, one of the things that comes to mind while you think is I've had a few opportunities to be on a set for some other reason than visual effects. And I never jump in or overstep my boundaries, because that's one of the first things about set etiquette is just shut the fuck up. You don't know what you're talking about unless you do. But I've been in a situation where it had come up previously in the conversation, like at lunch or something, that I was an effects person talking with the supervisor at some point. And I ended up getting later it was like, oh God, do you know how to do this? And the answer was yes. And anytime the answer is really yes, sort of as a counterpoint to what we were just talking about, anytime the answer is really yes, that's a good feeling.
Yeah. For sure.
And it's one of those things where it's like, this is what we play for. This is how we prepared.
Yeah.
Opportunity meets preparation, something. But it feels like a win when there is a complicated thing that you know how to maneuver, how to get out of this. It must be what it feels like to be like an airline pilot.
Teague's got the answer.
Where it's like, it's like there's a storm up there. It's like, just Denzel, motherfucker. Like,
we're gonna invert the plane.
Flip the plane,
everybody.
It'll be fine.
Yeah, no, it's true, and being on set is honestly the most fun I have. I should really just do that.
It does feel the most like being in the movie business.
But it's great because it reminds me usually how much I know that is just stuff that I don't even think about on a constant basis. Like, you've forgotten the foundations of all this stuff, and so somebody will ask a question. It's like, oh, how should we shoot this? And you're like, that is so basic in your mind, but you're like, oh yeah, of course. Like, this is not everyone and you're like, oh, okay. And then being able to go, yeah, here's what we're going to do, A, B, and C, and here's why. And then like, oh, okay, cool. And it's like, yeah, being the one who's got the answer, who knows. And then you're like, in your head, you're like, yep, I am the man.
I know I'm right. Hooray.
And here's how we're going to do. And the honest answer, not that I'm just hijacking your on set point, but, getting to do, I'm supervising a project called Atropa, which, depending on when you listen to this...
Atropa.
Atropa. And when you listen to this may be a 10-minute short film that's on Vimeo. That actually will be the case, regardless of when you listen to this to. Or it may be a full web series unleashed by Hulu, which will be later on this year, which means nothing to you listening in the future. 2016. So, but... as the visual effects supervisor on this project, which is ultimately almost maybe roughly feature length, all everything added up.
Big thing.
I'm making lots of decisions on how to approach this stuff. And so the really gratifying part is to be faced with a situation and go, there's a number of different ways to do this, and getting to pick the one that's better than just the default bullshit that many other supervisors would probably do.
Not just playing it safe because you know the professional answer to this question, but feeling comfortable and secure in the professional space to be creative.
Right. And in conjunction with that and or separate to it are situations where you're the guy who gets to save, it's like, oh man, we can't do this because, and then you're like, nah, it's cool.
Right.
Don't worry about it. And then you're enabling creative freedom with the director, the DP, or whoever who are like, oh man, this is a big VFX thing, right? And then you get to go calm them down, be like, no, don't worry about it. This is the answer. Here's how we got to do it.
You know what? If you tilt
We're
the
all
camera
set,
up, that shot takes 50 hours less to finish.
Right. Exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It's like your whole problem can be solved if you just do dink.
So that's the exciting tease to hopefully my next career stage is doing more supervising like that and getting to really sort of top down design a lot of that stuff. So
one of the other fun things, I like the idea of sort of finish this up on the fun anecdotes. One of the other fun things, it is, if you think in terms of like adding something into a shot and there's like a funny story to that thing that you added, it is generally naughty to do Easter eggy shit. Here's the way you should feel about it. Don't pull that shit. Don't add, like, I say this as someone who has done it, but don't, and I did it early in my career and now I feel bad about it and I'm just glad that no one ever caught me, because if someone caught you, it would be very bad. It is, and not just in terms of getting caught, it's also, it's kind of wrong of you to do it to someone else's thing, especially if it's like someone else's baby, is that you're adding, if someone ever finds it, you're adding a thing that will be on the IMDb trivia for that thing forever. And you're like adding context to a work of art that isn't yours. That's not cool, just generally speaking. Also, you'll get caught, so don't fucking do it. But things that are meant to be there and it's fine, and just how you had to get there to do it, like we had to go shoot that to make that part happen or whatever.
Yeah.
Those are fun. Every day you're in a situation where it's like, they want us to do what? And it's like, there isn't an answer to that. It's like, all right, so we got to go like get a green poster board and film that out in the parking lot right now. Or something like that. Those are always really fun.
Yeah.
Or like, how did that end up happening? It's like, funny story. Well, and you know, how we got there, when the means justify the ends, that is a good Easter egg. When the ends are what you're trying to justify, no, don't do that. Right. Don't add your weird little, like, don't like write a cuss word or your friend's name in the background or something. Don't do that shit. Just don't. But one of the fun ones was, at one point, there was a shot in a thing I worked on with Kevin Bacon.
Yep.
I'm sure you're familiar with the Kevin Bacon game, the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, whereby like, so Bill Paxton was in Apollo 13 with Kevin Bacon, so he's 1 degree of separation, right? But then like Helen Hunt was in Twister with Bill Paxton, who was in Apollo 13 with Kevin Bacon, so she's 2 degrees. And you know, there's that whole thing, and the premise being that you're generally speaking never going to find an actor who's more than 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. It's kind of a fun party game. It's like, all right, can you get me from Sacha Baron Cohen to Kevin Bacon? It's like, all right, I'll try to do this, and you know, one guy comes up with 4, she comes up with 2. It's like, ooh, she wins.
Right.
I was working on a shot where Kevin Bacon was the passenger in a car. The car was shot on green screen. Now, and it was night outside, so you're seeing the stuff passing by and all that, but there was a few lights on in the car, like the lights that wouldn't be on in a real car but have to be on because it's a movie, right? And you're seeing faces, so it's like
the dashboard is as bright as a fluorescent light.
Exactly. So you have to, in addition to whatever you're putting back there, the shot looked wrong without a little bit of a reflection of Kevin Bacon,
of course, like
his arm and just the sort of side of him that was over by the window.
Right.
We needed something over there, but the way the angle worked in this particular shot, there was no way to extract it from the imagery or any other shot from the scene. So what we ended up doing was creating our own element of that. And what it ends up being is a picture of me. Now, it's not the head. You don't see his head.
Yeah, you're talking about torso,
like torso,
and an arm.
like the necky, sort of shouldersy arms area reflecting across the back.
Lit the right way.
So it matches, and it's faded. It's not like you're looking at this very hard, but it's just in there so that the shot doesn't look wrong. Yeah. You know? But it's not Kevin Bacon. It's me.
Yeah.
I am Kevin Bacon. Therefore, I am 0 degrees.
You portrayed
0 degrees
Kevin
from
Bacon.
Kevin Bacon.
Yes.
Like, not even his parents got that. Like, Kevin Bacon himself and me are the only 2 people who are 0 degrees away from Kevin Bacon.
I think the only other person who could claim that might be his stunt double.
That's true. I would give it to a stunt
That's about
double.
it. Yeah.
I would
portraying Kevin Bacon
but
directly.
I wasn't in a shot with Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
I was Kevin Bacon.
There you go.
And that kind of thing. Things like that, or like when the solution is something along those lines, that's always fun. The weird little story of how you got to the end there.
Sometimes you get shafted the price of a car. Sometimes you get to play Kevin Bacon.
I am Kevin Bacon.
There you go.
Yeah, man.
That's good there.
That's my secret cap. I am Kevin Bacon. All right. So you want to wrap it up there and call it a night?
Let's do it. So kiddies, folks who are listening here, we exist online and can be emailed, and are generally happy to dispense advice and thoughts on. You can always
reach me. My name is Teague Chrystie. And it's firstname.lastname@gmail.com. Teague.Chrystie@gmail. Mm-hmm. If you Google the word Teague, it'll help you. Because I know both of those names are kind of hard to spell sometimes.
I feel in a way I owe a lot of my sort of early ambitions to online communities of folks who are just sort of open about this kind of stuff and talking about it. And so in a certain way, it's kind of paying it forward to a younger generation. And I've had a number of kids who have told me explicitly that lightsaber tutorials that I had made or works that I had done were inspirational to them in getting into effects, and now they're going to schools for it and stuff like that, and that's always really nice.
I follow those tutorials.
So yeah, well, there was the only one at the time. So
it's Qui-Gon, not once, not twice, but thrice.
So, but anyway, yeah, that is an ongoing thing.
How do people get in touch with you?
You could just hit me up, Ryan_Wieber at yahoo.com is my just general catch-all email, Wieber. My website is Ryan-W.com. That's got the email on it, so that's even better, probably, and a reel and links to things. So, yeah.
And what's your address and what's your mom's maiden name?
So it's my social security number is.
Do you have any pets? All right, cool.
Yeah, what's your first car and your school mascot? just curious.
Hopefully this has been a fun way for you to spend 3 hours and 40 minutes or something.
Ooh.
God, so long.
Yeah.
Long time, but it's been fun for us, and it was nice to talk to you. If you're jonesing